The sky over Wembley Stadium was a bruised purple, streaked with the last fiery fingers of sunset, as Ginny Weasley rose on her broom, heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The crowd roared below, a living wave of sound that rolled up in waves, chanting her name. Ginny, Ginny, as if she were still the girl who'd stolen matches with a grin and a dive. But tonight the air felt heavier, the wind sharper against her cheeks. She tightened her grip on the firebolt, knuckles white. One more goal. That was all it would take to seal the match, to prove, again, always again, that she belonged here, at the peak. The quaffle burned red in her hands as she banked hard to the left, dodging a bludger that whistled past her ear like an angry hornet. The opposing chaser, a hulking brute from Puddlemere United, closed in fast, shoulder-checking her mid-air. She twisted, gritted her teeth, and hurled the ball toward the left hoop. It slipped through clean, the golden ring flashing under the floodlights. Cheers erupted. The scoreboard blinked. 320 to 290. Victory, so close she could taste it, metallic and sweet. Then the sky cracked. A thunderclap split the air, not from clouds, but from above. A rogue bludger, bewitched beyond regulation, spiraled down like a comet, struck her broom mid-flight. The wood splintered with a sound like breaking bone. Her stomach lurched. For one weightless second, she hummed suspended. Breath caught, the world tilting beneath her. Then gravity won. She fell. Wind screamed in her ears. The stands blurred into streaks of color. Crimson, gold, emerald. Faces frozen in shock. She tried to twist, to cast, but her wand was still in her belt. The ground rushed up. She braced, arms crossing over her face. The impact was not the shattering shash she expected. Instead, something hot and sudden flared beneath her. A pulse of light, crimson and gold like a phoenix cry given form. For a heartbeat, fire cradled her, slowing her descent. Then it vanished, and she hit the turf hard, rolling once, twice, before coming to rest on her side. Silence fell, then chaos. Healers swarmed. Midi wizards in silver robes pressed wands to her spine, her legs, her left arm. She heard murmurs. Compound fracture. Magical backlash detected. Spinal stress. Caution. Pain blued in her shoulder, sharp and deep, but worse was the numbness creeping down her left leg. She tried to move her toes. Nothing. Above her the scoreboard flickered, then went dark. 3 days later, in a sterile room at St. Mungo's, the diagnosis came like a death sentence. "The nerve damage is extensive," said Healer Thorne, his voice gentle but firm. "Even with full treatment, flight stability is unlikely. The risk of re-injury, it's too great. I'm sorry, Miss Weasley. Your Quidditch career is over." Ginny stared at the ceiling, the words circling like vultures. Over. Not on hold. Not recovering. Over. She didn't cry, not then, not when the press gathered outside, not when her teammates came to visit with hollow eyes and forced smiles. She sat by the window, watching rain trace paths down the glass, thinking not of the fall, but of the fire, that strange impossible warmth that had risen to meet her. No one mentioned it. The report called it residual spell work from the stadium wards, but she remembered the color. The voice in the flame, if a voice could be made of heat and light. That night, she packed her things, robes, medals, a worn photograph of the team from her first championship. She left the broom behind. At home in the quiet of the Burrow's attic, she lit a candle, watched the flame dance. It swayed toward her just slightly, as if drawn. She exhaled. "Tell me," she whispered. "What are you?" The fire flickered, then burned a little brighter. The wind howled through the cracks in the cottage walls, a low, insistent moan that matched the ache in Ginny's bones. Rain lashed against the window pane, blurring the silhouette of the orchard beyond into a watercolor wash of grays and browns. Inside, the hearth fire spat and hissed, its flames too eager, too hungry. She watched them, arms wrapped around her knees, seated on the worn rug where she'd spent most of the past 3 nights. The fire didn't obey. Not really. Not the way a broom had. She remembered the feel of the wind beneath her, the sharp clarity of the pitch spread below like a living map. The rush when she dove, the world narrowing to a single golden speck ahead, then the snap, the sickening twist in her shoulder, the way her body betrayed her mid-air, tumbling through the clouds like a broken kite. They'd said she was lucky. Lucky to walk. Lucky to have full use of her arm, even if it ached with every change in the weather. Lucky. The word tasted like a... Now her days were measured in scrolls unrolled, ink smudged across parchment, and the quiet hum of simmering cauldrons in the back room. She studied fire, not the kind conjured for warmth or spells, but wildfire. The kind that moved like thought, that flickered with intent. Sentient flames, the old texts called them. Elemental echoes. She'd found fragments in forgotten tomes from the Department of Mysteries archives, scrolls smuggled home under her cloak like stolen dreams. Most scholars dismissed them as myth, but Ginny had seen something once in the ruins of an abandoned Welsh village, a flame that curled toward her like a cat, then vanished when she reached for it. A log cracked in the hearth, sending up a flurry of embers that swirled in the air before dying on the stone. One landed on her sleeve. She didn't flinch. Let it burn, but it didn't. The instant it touched the fabric, it winked out, as if repelled. She frowned, lifting her arm. Her fingers brushed the spot, cold, untouched, not even singed. "That's new," she whispered. Outside, the storm deepened. Thunder rolled across the hills, shaking the cottage's timbers. She stood, restless, pacing the small room. The walls felt tighter each day, the silence louder. She missed the chaos of the burrow, the clatter of her brother's voices, the way her mother would bustle in with tea and scolding. But she couldn't go back. Not yet. Not until she understood what the fire wanted, or what it saw in her. She lit a lantern and stepped into the study, a converted pantry crammed with books, jars of powdered salamander skin, and sketches of flame patterns. Her latest notes lay scattered across the table, a sketch of a flame with eyes, just a hunch, really. But the more she read, the more she wondered, what if fire wasn't a force to be controlled, but a voice, a memory? What if it remembered the people who died in it, the homes it had consumed, the secrets it had swallowed? She dipped a quill in ink, her hand hovering, then stopped. A sound, faint, beneath the storm. Footsteps on the path, crunching gravel. Her breath caught. No one came out here. Not in this weather, not at this hour. The lantern flickered, and then a knock. 3 slow raps, like branches against glass. She didn't move. The knock came again. Firmer this time. Human. She crossed the room, heart thudding, and opened the door. Rain poured from the brim of a dark cloak. A face emerged from the shadow. Familiar, worn, green eyes wide, with something between relief and dread. "Ginny," he said, voice rough. "I need your help." She stared. "Harry." Rain tapped against the window pane of Harry's office like impatient fingers, a steady rhythm that matched the throb behind his temples. The Ministry of Magic's Auror department was quiet this late. Most had gone home, or to the pub, or wherever it was. People went when they weren't sorting through reports of magical disturbances in backwater villages nobody had heard of. Harry rubbed his eyes and reached for the next file. The cover read, "Incident Report, Ashmire Hollow, 23 to 24 September. Spontaneous fires." He scanned the first page. No signs of arson. No use of incendio, or any known spell residue. Fires had ignited in 3 separate homes, always near the hearth, always at night. No fatalities, but 2 families had lost everything. The flames, according to witness accounts, didn't spread like normal fire. They moved, coiled like serpents. Listened. One woman swore the fire had whispered her name. Harry set the report down slowly. His fingers brushed the edge of another file, already flagged. Ashmire Hollow again. This one dated 3 weeks earlier. A barn burned to the ground. No cause, no explanation. The local magical maintenance office had dismissed it as faulty wards, but someone had kept reporting. Someone persistent. He reached for the stack of letters tied with frayed blue ribbon. The top one was addressed in jagged script, ink smudged in places as if written in haste. Ministry of Magic, Auror Division. To the attention of Harry Potter. I am writing for the 3rd time. No one listens. The fire is not an accident. It wakes at night. It knows our names. He unfolded it carefully. The letter was dated over a month ago, said by a woman named Alara Voss, self-described as a keeper of the hearth, and resident of Ashmire Hollow. She spoke of embers that refused to die, of flames that danced without fuel, of a presence in the smoke, something ancient, restless. At first, Harry had dismissed it as superstition, but now, with 3 more reports, a pattern was forming. And patterns were what Aurors were trained to see. He leaned back, the springs in his chair groaning. Outside, the sky had darkened into bruised purple, the rain now a steady hush against the glass. His desk was cluttered, maps, old case files, a cold cup of tea. Somewhere in the depths of the ministry, a lift rattled. He thought of Ginny then, unbidden. It had been months since they'd spoken properly. Not since she'd left for the Northern Archives, chasing some obscure study on phoenix fire and elemental resonance. He remembered her eyes when she talked about it. Bright, focused, alive in a way he hadn't seen since before the war, before Quidditch, before everything had become so heavy. He picked up her last letter from the stack, the one he hadn't opened yet. Light blue envelope, corner slightly singed. He frowned. Not from fire, more like something had licked it with heat, precise and deliberate. He turned it over. No return address, just his name, written in her hand. With a flick of his wand, he slit the seal. Harry, if you get this, burn the report they send you about Ashmire Hollow. Not figuratively, burn it. There's something there they don't understand. I've seen the records, fragments of old wards, fireglyphs from the pre-Wizarding Wars era. This isn't random. It's a summoning, and it's waking up. They think it's an outbreak. I think it's a memory. I'm going there. Meet me if you still trust your instincts. And Harry, don't come alone. Bring someone who remembers what fire feels like. His breath caught. The office felt suddenly colder. He looked back at the ministry report, then to her words, urgent, edged with something he couldn't name. Not fear, not quite, anticipation. He stood, tossing his cloak over his shoulders. The rain outside had turned to mist, curling around the ministry towers like smoke. Somewhere beyond the city, beyond the quiet villages and forgotten histories, a fire was waiting. And for the first time in years, Harry felt the old pull, the one that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with her. The first snow of winter dusted the windowsill of the small stone cottage in Upper Hogsmeade, but Ginny Weasley barely noticed. Her fingers, ink-stained and calloused from years of gripping a broomstick, now traced the brittle edge of a yellowed parchment spread across her desk. The fire in the hearth crackled, casting long dancing shadows that flickered like restless spirits across the walls lined with books, tomes on pyromancy, forgotten incantations, and scrolls unrolled from the deepest vaults of the Department of Mysteries. She exhaled, watching the flame dip and sway as if in response. 3 months since the healers had told her she'd never fly again. 3 months since the windborne wasps released her with polite condolences and a modest severance. 3 months since the last time she'd felt truly alive, soaring above the pitch, wind screaming in her ears, the snitch a glinting speck ahead. Now, her victories were measured in footnotes and fragments, in the slow, grinding pursuit of knowledge no one else seemed to care about. But fire had always been hers. She remembered the first time she'd set a curtain ablaze with accidental magic, age 6, screaming in triumph when her mother had doused it with a flick. She'd loved the way it moved, hungry, alive, beautiful in its destruction. Later, in her years at Hogwarts, she'd mastered the incendio charm faster than anyone in her year, not because she was the most powerful, but because she understood it. Fire wasn't just heat and light. It spoke, and now it might be the only thing left that still listened to her. Ginny dipped her quill into the inkwell, the tip scratching across a fresh page of her journal. Observed, flame behavior in proximity to enchanted runes of the old tongue suggests resonance, particularly with symbols tied to emotion or memory. Fire does not merely consume, it remembers. She paused, frowning. That wasn't in any of the texts she'd studied. It was her own theory, fragile and untested, but the patterns were there, subtle shifts in flame color, in how it curled around certain inscriptions as if drawn to them. The fire in her hearth had flared when she'd spoken aloud the name of the lost spell, Ignis Anima, and the warmth had felt almost like an embrace. A cold draft crept under the door, and the flames shivered. Ginny pulled her woolen shawl tighter, turning to a scroll sealed with red wax, the one she'd borrowed under false pretenses from the restricted section. It was written in a cipher, one she'd spent weeks deciphering. The title, once uncovered, had sent a chill down her spine. On the sentience of elemental fire, the breath of the first flame. According to legend, before wizards tamed fire with wands and words, there were fires that walked, fires that spoke in tongues of ash and ember. They were said to have lived in the hollow mountains beyond the North Sea, worshipped by forgotten tribes who believed the flames housed the souls of the passionate dead. Ginny had dismissed it as myth, until last week, when a parchment from a colleague in Norway arrived, describing a village where fires moved on their own, curling around homes like serpents, refusing to burn the innocent. The villagers called it Ildskjar, fire soul. She traced the edge of the Norwegian letter with trembling fingers. Something was waking. Her reflection flickered in the dark window. A woman with sharp cheekbones, eyes too bright, hair aflame against the winter night. She looked nothing like the girl who'd laughed in the stands, the one Harry Potter had once loved. Harry, she hadn't seen him in over a year, not since he'd taken the Auror post in the outer provinces, chasing dark wizards into the frozen edges of the world. She'd read the reports, brief, impersonal. He was alive, that was all she knew. And yet, sometimes, when the fire burned high, she thought she felt him, near, but not quite. As if he was standing just beyond the edge of the light. A soft pop came from the hearth. The flames bent inward, forming a spiral, then, for the briefest moment, shaped into two letters. HB. Ginny froze. Her breath caught. Then the wind howled, the shape collapsed, and the fire returned to its quiet dance. She stared at the embers, heart pounding. This was no accident. This was a message, and it meant she wasn't alone in this. The wind carried the scent of charred pine, and something else, something metallic like heated iron. Long before Harry saw the village, he trudged through the sodden moorland, his Auror cloak pulled tight against the drizzle, the hood casting his face in shadow. The map had led him astray twice, its enchanted ink smudged by rain, but the flicker in the distance guided him now. A faint, pulsing glow above the tree line, not the steady yellow of torches or hearth, but a restless, shifting red. Like breath. By the time he reached the first cottages, dusk had thickened into night. The village crouched in a shallow valley, ringed by skeletal birches, their bark peeling like scorched paper. Most homes stood dark and shuttered, doors barred with iron chains, but fire moved between them. Not wildfire, not even close. It slithered. Tendrils of flame, though taller than a child, crept along the ground like serpents made of embers. They pulsed gently, coiling around fence posts, testing door handles with flickering fingers. One paused beneath a window, its light rising in a slow spiral, as if listening. Harry froze, hand on his wand. He'd faced cursed objects, inferi, even a basilisk, but this was different. This fire didn't burn mindlessly. It watched. A low crack echoed from behind him. He turned slowly. A patch of grass ignited in a perfect circle, flames leaping upward in a controlled column. They didn't spread, they waited. Then, as if sensing his stare, the column bent at the middle, leaning toward him like a curious head. Harry stepped back. Finite incantatum. The fire didn't vanish. It shuddered, its core dimming for a heartbeat, then flared brighter. The flames now shaped themselves into a rough approximation of a face. Two hollow eyes, a gaping mouth. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. The air around it grew hot, charged with warning. He raised his wand higher. Vertigo. The shield charm shimmered into place just as the fire lunged. Not in a wave, but as a single focused stream, like a thrown spear of flame. It struck the barrier with a hiss and a crackle, holding steady for 3 long seconds, before dissolving into sparks that rained down like dying stars. Silence returned. The other flames had retreated, hugging the edges of the path, their light subdued. "You're not supposed to be here," a voice said. Harry spun. A woman stood in the shadow of a half-burnt barn, her silhouette sharp against the glow. She wore a long coat of dark wool, tied at the waist, and a satchel hung from her shoulder, bulging with books and vials. Her red hair was tied back, streaked with ash, and when she stepped forward, her eyes, hazel, sharp, familiar, locked onto his. "Ginny." She didn't smile. "I said you shouldn't be here, Harry. They don't like strangers, especially ones who try to curse them." "I wasn't cursing them," he said, lowering his wand slightly. "I was defending myself. That thing attacked me." "That thing was testing you," she said, walking past the smoldering circle without flinching. "And you failed. It only lunges when it senses fear or aggression. You gave it both." He stared at her. "Since when do you speak fire?" "Since I started listening," she said, kneeling beside one of the low flames that now curled around her boots like a cat. "They're not mindless. They're aware. Not human aware, but aware. And they're scared." "Scared of what?" She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of us, of being put out, of being forgotten. Fire remembers, Harry, especially when it's been wronged." He crouched beside her, watching the flame flicker up her sleeve, gentle now, almost affectionate. "You've been studying them, for months." "She my last match. Since I realized fire was the only thing that still made sense." She paused. "You're not here for a social call, are you? Or a business?" "Reports of spontaneous combustion, missing villagers. The ministry thought it was dark magic." "It is," she said, standing. "But not the kind they think. This isn't curses or hexes. This is memory. This is grief. And if we don't understand it soon, the whole valley will burn, not from the outside in, but from the ground up." Above them, the clouds parted, moonlight spilled over the ruins, and for a heartbeat the flames stilled, their light softening, like something old finally exhaling. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the window panes of the small study, a dull counterpoint to the crackle of the hearth fire that Ginny Weasley hadn't lit. The room smelled of old parchment, dried herbs, and the faint, ever-present trace of something sharper, burned sugar and ozone. Her fingers traced the margin of an ancient tome, bound in charred dragonhide, its pages whispering secrets written in a dialect of fire magic, long abandoned. The ink shimmered when the lamplight caught it just right, as if remembering the heat that birthed it. A knock at the door startled her. Not the polite tap of a neighbor or the cheerful bank of a student. This was measured, urgent, official. "Come in," she called, closing the book, gently, as one might a sleeping child's eyes. The door opened with a soft creak, and a silhouette filled the frame. Broad-shouldered, cloaked in dark Auror robes still damp from the storm outside. He hesitated, as if unsure of his welcome. "Ginny?" Her breath caught. Not from shock, not from pain, but from the quiet certainty that time had both changed and not changed him. His hair was still a mess of raven waves, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, not just from fatigue, but from years of watching, waiting, protecting. "Harry," he stepped in, removing his hood. Water droplets scattered across the wooden floor. "I didn't know if you'd even be here." "I live here now," she said simply. "Research is easier away from the noise. Less people asking how I'm really doing." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough." He looked around, shelves crammed with scrolls, diagrams pinned to the wall like constellations of flame, a small glass case containing a vial of liquid fire that pulsed like a heartbeat. "This is all about fire?" "Not just fire," she said, rising from her chair. "Sentient fire. Self-sustaining, self-aware. The kind that doesn't burn because of heat, but because it wants to." Harry frowned. "That's not possible." "Fire doesn't think. Tell that to the village of Ember Hollow," she said quietly. 3 days ago their hearths refused to go out. Not just refused, grew. Windows melted from the inside. Crops ignited in the fields. No wands, no spells, just fire that walked. His expression sharpened. "How do you know?" "Because I've been studying the legends, the Ignis Sapiens, the Fireborn. They were said to be spirits of old magic, born when a great sorrow met a great flame. They don't destroy for destruction's sake, they remember." He stared at her, something shifting in his gaze, realization perhaps, or the dawning fear that she knew more than the ministry reports had claimed. "That's why I came," he admitted. "The Aurors are stumped. Spells don't work. Water vanishes before it hits the flames. We've lost 2 men already. Burned, yes, but Their bodies didn't ash, they turned to glass, like they were preserved. Ginny exhaled slowly. That's not destruction. That's mourning. Harry blinked. What? When fire becomes sentient, it doesn't just burn. It transforms. It takes what's lost and holds it. I think whatever's happening in Ember Hollow isn't an attack. It's a memory trying to speak. He ran a hand through his hair, the old gesture of frustration and awe all at once. And you knew this was coming? No, she said, stepping closer. But I've been waiting for someone to ask the right question. The ministry listed me as a fire scholar. I didn't think anyone would actually come. I did, he said, meeting her eyes. Because no one else talks about magic like it's alive. And no one else looked at fire the way you looked at a Quidditch pitch, with respect. And the little fear. A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken years, of missed letters, of funerals attended without touching, of a love that had flared bright, and then cooled into embers. But now, something stirred. Not just the fire in the stories, but the quiet spark between them, fanned by urgency, by purpose. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, and deep in the earth, beneath the sleeping village of Ember Hollow, something ancient cracked open its eyes. The wind howled down the valley like a restless spirit, carrying with it the scent of charred wood and damp earth. Ginny stood at the edge of the scorched field, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, watching the flicker of unnatural light dance behind the cracked windows of the abandoned cottage. It wasn't wildfire. Fire didn't leave patterns in the ash, didn't retreat at dawn, only to return at dusk, whispering through the thatch like it was searching for something, or someone. A crunch of gravel behind her made her spine stiffen. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Still have that habit of standing too close to danger. I see, she said, voice quiet, but hedged with something she couldn't quite name. Resentment, maybe, or the old ache of something unfinished. Harry stopped a few paces away, his Auror cloak pulled tight against the chill. And you still answer questions you haven't been asked. She turned then slowly. 10 years had carved lines beside his eyes, silvered at his temples. He looked tired, worn, but his gaze, steady, green, unflinching, was the same. You're late. I had to reroute. The fire moved again, burned a path through the west pasture. Cattle, unharmed, fences reduced to glass. Like it melted the wood. Ginny exhaled, her breath a pale plume in the cold. It's not random. It's learning. He studied her, really looked at her, for the first time since he'd arrived. You've been studying it. Someone had to. She turned back to the cottage. After Puddlemere let me go, I couldn't just stop moving. So I moved into research. Fire magic. Ancient wards. Elemental bindings. Turns out, no one's written much about flames that avoid water, but fear silence. Silence? She nodded. When the village holds a vigil, no talking, no singing, no wands. The fire retreats. Lasts about 3 hours. Then it comes back. Hungrier. Harry frowned. That's not natural fire. That's sentient. Or controlled. Or both. She glanced at him. Which is why you're here. Official Auror business? Technically yes, but Kingsley let me take it personal. Said I'd have better instincts here. A pause. Said you might listen to me. Ginny's jaw tightened. I listened to evidence, not old promises. He didn't flinch. I'm not here to reopen anything, Ginny. I'm here because 12 people have lost homes. One boy was found curled in a stone, well, untouched, wrapped in heat that didn't burn. His hair turned white overnight. She turned fully now, eyes narrowing. You've seen him? He's in St. Mungo's under concealment. No one knows what to call it. I do. He met her gaze. It's not a curse. It's a call. They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind pulling at their clothes like invisible hands. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, short, sharp, then cut off abruptly. Finally, Ginny stepped closer. If this is what I think it is, it's not just fire. It's memory. Motion given form. And if it's choosing who it touches, then it knows who's afraid, Harry finished. And who's hiding. She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the hero of the papers, not the boy she once loved, but a man who'd spent years chasing shadows and finding pieces of himself in the dark, just like her. I've mapped the burn pattern, she said at last. There's a rhythm, a pulse, like a heartbeat under the soil. Harry nodded. And the epicenter? The old well behind the church, where the first child vanished, where the soil doesn't freeze in winter. They looked at each other, the past a quiet hum between them, neither acknowledging it nor able to ignore it. "So," she said, voice softer now, "you want to go down there? Only if you're with me." A breath, a pause, then barely above a whisper. Always did hate going into dark places alone. He almost smiled. "Then we start at midnight, when the fire wakes. And we don't light our wands," she added. "It sees light, but it listens to silence." Harry nodded. "Then we'll be quiet." Ginny turned toward the village where the lights flickered like dying embers. "Not just quiet, Harry. We'll have to mean it." The air in the cottage was thick with the scent of charred wood and something sharper, ozone maybe, or the metallic tang of lightning held too long in a jar. Ginny crouched beside the blackened hearth, her fingers hovering just above the soot-stained stone. No heat radiated from it now, not even a whisper. Yet the residue shimmered faintly under the dim glow of her wand light, like ash laced with crushed stars. She exhaled slowly, watching the particles rise and dance in the beam. This wasn't ordinary fire damage. The pattern was too precise, fractal branches etched into the wall, spiraling outward from the center like veins in living tissue. And it hadn't spread through wood or fabric. It had chosen its path. "Anything?" Harry's voice came from the doorway, low and cautious. He stood with his weight shifted forward, Auror instincts never quite at rest. Ginny didn't look up. "It's not cursed. That's the first thing. No dark incantations, no residual spell work, no trace of human magic at all." He stepped inside, careful not to disturb the chalk marks on the floor, where the villagers had been found unconscious but unburned. But fire doesn't just decide to spare people. "No," she agreed, "not ordinary fire." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small glass vial filled with a swirling, opalescent dust, collected from the edge of the last blaze. When she uncorked it, the particles rose like smoke, drawn to the hearth. They didn't settle, they pulsed, flickering in response to something unseen. Harry took a step back. "That's not possible." "It is," Ginny said softly. "This fire is alive. Not in the way a cursed flame might be, possessed or summoned. It's sentient, and it's responding to emotion." He frowned. "Emotion?" She nodded. "Look at the patterns." The fire moved toward the child's room. Warmth, fear, loneliness. It stopped at the threshold, licked the doorframe, and retreated. It didn't burn the bedding. Instead, it left this. She pointed to a faint, curling mark on the wood, delicate, almost like a caress. Harry knelt beside her, his breath uneven. "You're saying it's feeling?" "I'm saying it feels," Ginny corrected. "And it's feeling what they feel. Fear makes it flare, grief makes it linger, but kindness, calm makes it retreat. This fire isn't attacking, it's reacting." Silence settled between them, heavy and fragile. Outside, the wind stirred the bare branches of the orchard, and in the distance, a single crow called. "I've seen dark magic do terrible things," Harry said at last, "but never something like this. Something that understands." Ginny closed her eyes. "After Quidditch, I thought I'd lost everything that defined me. I spent months chasing theories, ancient texts, anything to make sense of why my body failed me. But I kept coming back to fire, not the kind we conjure with wands, the kind that exists in stories, elemental, primal. The kind that chooses its own path." She opened her eyes, meeting his. "There's a legend, older than Hogwarts, older than Merlin, about the Ember Wards. Beings of pure flame, born from the first spark of creation. They weren't meant to be controlled. They were meant to balance. When a place grows too cold inside, when sorrow or rage builds up like smoke, they appear. Not to destroy, to cleanse." Harry stared at the scorched wall. "And this village? Something's buried here," she said. "Something that's been bleeding, emotion into the land. Grief, guilt. The fire isn't the problem, it's the symptom." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the shift in his gaze. Not just the Auror assessing a threat, but the boy who once flew with her under starlit skies, who knew her temper and her silence both. "You've been seeing this for a while, haven't you?" he asked. She nodded. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I study it, the more I feel it, like a hum beneath my skin. This fire, it's not something we can arrest or banish. We have to listen to it. A gust rattled the window pane. For a breath, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, and then, just for a moment, the hearth glowed. Not with heat, but with light, soft, amber, like the last breath of sunset. And in that light, Ginny felt it. A whisper against her mind, warm and curious. Hello, it seemed to say, and she answered, not with words, but with the quiet openness of a heart long shuttered, finally beginning to burn. The wind howled through the blackened arches of the chapel like a grieving spirit, carrying with it the scent of charred stone and something older, dry earth, buried incense, and the faintest trace of smoke that refused to fade. Ginny stepped carefully over a collapsed beam, her boots crunching on brittle ash that clung to the ground like winter frost. She pulled her cloak tighter, though it wasn't the cold that made her shiver. The air here was too still beneath the wind, as if the world held its breath. Harry followed a few paces behind, his wand drawn but unlit. He didn't need light to feel the wrongness in this place. The stones, once pale limestone, were now stained a deep, unnatural red, like blood soaked into bone. He reached out, brushing his fingers against the wall. The surface wasn't just burned, it was consumed. Not even soot remained in the crevices, only smooth, glassy patches where the heat had been so intense it melted rock. This wasn't an accident, Ginny murmured. She knelt beside a shattered altar, tracing the outline of a carved phoenix now split down the middle. Fire doesn't burn like this. Not even fiend fire leaves this kind of transformation. Harry crouched beside her. You think it was intentional? I think it chose this place, she said quietly. Look, the pews, they're gone, completely vaporized. But the frescoes on the ceiling, they're untouched. The fire bypassed them. It didn't spread, it moved. They both looked up. High above, the vaulted ceiling remained pristine, depicting a starry sky with a comet streaking across it, its tail shaped like a flame. Harry frowned. That's not a comet. It's a sigil. I've seen something like it in old Auror reports, linked to pre-wizarding war cults that worshipped elemental spirits. Ginny stood, brushing ash from her knees. The villagers said the fire appeared at midnight. No spark, no lightning, just flames rising from the floor. And they spoke in voices. Harry turned sharply. Voices? She met his gaze. A child said she heard her grandmother calling her name from inside the fire. Another man swore he saw faces in the flames. His brother's face. He died 10 years ago. A silence settled, thick and heavy. The wind dropped suddenly, and the air grew warmer. Unnaturally so. Ginny's fingers twitched toward her wand, but she didn't draw it. She had learned the hard way that some fires refused to be commanded. Then, a flicker. In the corner of the ruined nave, where the shadows pooled thickest, a tiny flame sparked to life. Blue at its core, shifting to gold at the edges. It hovered just above the ground, trembling like a breath held too long. Harry stepped between Ginny and the flame, wand raised. Stay back. But Ginny placed a hand on his arm. Wait. The flame didn't advance. It pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Then, softly, a whisper rose from it, faint, layered, like many voices speaking at once. Remember the vow. Ginny's breath caught. The voice was distant, echoing, but beneath the distortion, she knew it. A lullaby her mother used to sing, one she hadn't heard in years. Harry turned to her. Do you? She nodded, eyes wide. It's not just voices, it's memories, the fire. It's feeding on them, or carrying them. The flame dimmed, then surged upward into a slender pillar. For a moment, the shape of a woman formed within it, long hair flowing like smoke, arms outstretched. Then it vanished, leaving only warmth in the air, and the scent of lavender. Ginny exhaled. This isn't destruction, Harry, it's a message. He lowered his wand slowly. Then who's sending it? She stared at the spot where the flame had been. Something that remembers what we've forgotten. And it's not angry, not yet. But it's lonely. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Rain began to fall, but the ash on the ground didn't stir. The chapel remained dry, not untouched by the storm, but denied it. Ginny whispered, "It won't let water in. This place is still burning, even now." The air in the village of Emberfell tasted of cinders and old sorrow. Ginny knelt in the blackened remains of what had once been a bakery, her fingers brushing the soot-stained floorboards. The fire had burned hot, too hot. Wood shouldn't turn to glass, shouldn't leave behind swirling patterns like frozen breath. She inhaled slowly, the acrid tang of smoke clinging to her throat, but beneath it something else, a whisper, almost melodic like wind through hollow reeds. Harry stood at the edge of the ruin, his Auror robes singed at the hem. He'd arrived 3 days ago, summoned by reports of flames that moved with intent, that spared some homes while consuming others without reason. "It doesn't make sense," he said, voice low. "No dark magic signatures, no cursed objects, just fire." Ginny didn't look up. "It's not just fire." She reached into the ash, pulling out a shard of glassy wood, its surface etched with delicate spiraling lines. As her skin touched it, the whisper rose, a hum, then a voice, faint, but clear, lost, arid. "Remember me." She jerked her hand back, her breath fogged in a cold air, though the ground still radiated unnatural heat. Harry was at her side in an instant. "Ginny?" "I heard it," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Not with my ears, inside my head." He frowned, scanning the ruins. "Heard what?" A voice, a plea. She turned the shard over in her palm. "It's trapped, not causing this. It's afraid. The fire, it's not attacking. It's searching." Harry crouched beside her, his fingers grazing the scorched threshold. "You think it's sentient?" "And though it is." She closed her eyes, letting the silence stretch between the crackle of distant embers. "When I broke my leg, when they told me I'd never fly again, I didn't grieve the Quidditch. I grieved the sky, the way it held me, the way it answered when I pushed through the clouds. This fire, it feels like that, like something that once belonged to the air, to the breath of the world, and now it's forgotten." Harry watched her, the lines around his eyes softening. He hadn't seen her like this in years, not since before the war, before they'd both learned to bury things deep. "You feel it?" "I spent 2 years studying fire that refuses to obey, charms that fail, potions that boil over, runes that burn themselves away. I thought I was chasing knowledge, but I was chasing this." She opened her palm. The shard glowed faintly, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. A gust of wind swept through the ruins, though the sky above was still. Ashes spiraled upward, forming a shape, brief, fragile, a woman with flowing hair of flame, her mouth open in silent song. Then it collapsed, scattering into nothing. Harry stood, drawing his wand. "It's trying to show us something." Ginny rose with him, her heart pounding. "It's not dangerous. Not unless we keep ignoring it." The wind returned, stronger now, carrying with it a scent of wild thyme and distant rain. The whisper came again, clearer. "Find the stone beneath the old well, where the first fire slept." She met Harry's gaze. His expression was unreadable, but his hand found hers, warm and sure. "You still trust your instincts?" he asked. She squeezed his fingers. "Only when they're on fire." And together they walked toward the center of the village, where the earth split with heat, and the past waited, breathing beneath the smoke. The fire in the hearth flickered low, casting long, dancing shadows across the cracked stone walls of the cottage. Ginny sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, her back against the worn sofa, a stack of crumbling tomes spread around her like fallen soldiers. The scent of old parchment and wood smoke clung to the air, mingling with the faint metallic tang of rain still dripping from the eaves. Her fingers traced a delicate illustration in one of the texts, a flame with eyes, coiled like a serpent around an ancient rune. She exhaled slowly, her breath stirring the loose strands of hair that had escaped her braid. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the distant, restless crackle of the sentient fires that had plagued the village for weeks. They didn't burn like ordinary flames. They moved. They watched. A creak on the stairs made her lift her head. Harry emerged from the narrow staircase, his Auror robes replaced with simple wool and leather, his glasses slightly askew. He paused at the sight of her, the lines around his eyes softening. "You're still up," he said, voice low, as if afraid to break the quiet. "I can't stop thinking about the binding glyph. Ginny replied, tapping the page. It's not just containment magic, it's a dialogue, like the fire, wants to be heard. Harry stepped closer, crouching beside her. His knee brushed hers, just a touch, brief and warm, and she didn't pull away. He studied the page, his brow furrowing. This symbol, I've seen it before, not here. In the Department of Mysteries, on a fragment recovered from the ruins beneath Mount Etna. Ginny turned to him, startled. The elemental sanctuaries. I thought those were myths. They were supposed to be, he said. But the fire in the valley, it doesn't respond to standard suppression charms. It retreats when we speak certain words, old ones. Like it understands. A silence settled between them, thick with memory. Not just of this case, but of years ago. Of Quidditch pitches drenched in sunlight, of stolen moments between battles, of a love that had burned bright and fast, then cooled into embers under the weight of duty and distance. Ginny wrapped her arms around her knees. I used to think fire was just destruction. After the injury, when I couldn't fly anymore, I hated it. It felt like everything had burned out. Harry looked at her then, really looked, his green eyes catching the firelight. But you didn't run from it. You studied it. You stayed. Someone had to, she said with a small smile. Turns out fire isn't just about burning. It transforms. It reveals. He reached for one of the books, brushing dust from the spine. I thought being an Auror meant controlling darkness. But this isn't dark. It's alive. And we've been trying to fight it like it's a monster. Maybe we're the ones who don't belong, Ginny murmured. The fire in the hearth flared suddenly, not with heat, but with color, deep golds and blues spiraling upward like smoke given form. Both of them froze. From the flame, a low hum resonated, a sound like wind through hollow stone, and for a heartbeat, the shadow on the wall shaped itself into two figures, close, their hands almost touching. Ginny's breath caught. Harry didn't move, his gaze locked on the silhouette. That's not possible, he whispered. Is it, she asked, voice barely audible. Or have we been ignoring what's been here all along? He turned to her, close enough now that she could feel the warmth of his skin, smell the faint cedar on his clothes. I never stopped thinking about you, Ginny. Her heart stuttered. You never said. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that if I reached for you again, I'd lose you. Or worse, that I'd drag you into something dangerous. She laughed softly, without bitterness. I'm already in it, Harry, with the fire, with this place, with you. Outside, the wind died. The distant crackling ceased. For the first time in weeks, the valley fell silent, and in that stillness Ginny reached out, her fingers brushing his. Not a question, a promise. The fire dimmed, but did not go out. The air in the old stone cottage tasted of ash and damp earth, clinging to the back of Ginny's throat with every breath. Outside, the village of Ashmire lay half-buried beneath a perpetual twilight of smoke, the sky stained with the slow bleed of embers that drifted like dying stars. The fire had been burning for weeks now, not wild, not natural, a watching, waiting. And tonight it remembered her. She stood at the threshold of the ruined chapel, her boots crunching over charred floorboards that still radiated warmth despite the rain. Her hands trembled, though she clenched them into fists at her sides. The injury in her knee throbbed, a familiar ache that flared when the weather turned or when she stood too long. But this pain was different. It pulsed in time with the distant flicker of flame beyond the tree line, as if something deep in the earth were listening. Harry stood a few paces behind her, silent, his Auror robe soaked through, wand half raised. He didn't speak, knew better than to break the fragile stillness. He had seen it before, the way the fire responded to her. Once, when she'd stumbled on the path, her knee giving way, the flames had surged forward like a wave, curling around the edge of the cliff, without consuming it. Last night, when she dreamt of falling from her broom again, of the snap, the silence, the crowd gasping, it had lit the horizon in crimson spirals, writing shapes in the sky no spellbook could explain. It knows, Ginny whispered, her voice raw. It feels what I feel. Harry exhaled slowly. Or remembers what you do. She turned to look at him. Then, rain streaking her face like tears. I didn't even light a candle when it happened. I was on the pitch, and then, nothing. Just fire in my nerves, fire in my chest. And now this This thing burns when I remember." A gust of wind howled through the chapel's broken arches, and the flame beyond the woods pulsed in answer. It wasn't roaring, never that. It moved with intention, like breath, like grief. She limped forward, each step a negotiation with pain. The earth beneath her feet warmed as she neared the tree line. Roots, blackened but unbroken, curled like fingers from the soil. And then, a flicker. A single tongue of flame, blue at its core, rose from the ground between two stones. It didn't spread. It simply waited. Ginny knelt, ignoring a protest in her leg. The fire dipped toward her, not hot, not burning. It swayed, like a dog recognizing a long-lost hand. "Don't," Harry said, stepping closer. "We don't know what it wants." "It doesn't want," she said softly. "It remembers." And then she reached out. The flame curled around her fingers, cool and light as mist. A memory surged through her. Not hers, not entirely. A woman in robes of woven soot, standing where Ginny now knelt, raising her hands to a sky swallowed by smoke. She was screaming, not in fear, but in defiance. Behind her, a circle of villagers burned, not consumed, but transformed, their bodies becoming pillars of living flame that rose into the clouds. Ginny gasped, snatching her hand back. The vision vanished. The flame shrank, dimming to a dull glow. Harry caught her arm, steadying her. "What did you see?" She looked at him, her breath unsteady. A sacrifice, not to stop the fire, to become it. She gave herself, her rage, her grief, to keep the village alive. And it's been waiting. All this time, it's been waiting for someone who remembers what it's like to burn and not die. The wind died. The rain slowed. And in the silence, the flame rose again. Gentler this time, lapping at the air like a heartbeat. Ginny closed her eyes. The pain in her knee flared once more, sharp and sudden, and the fire in Edsor bloomed gold. The wind howled through the cracks in the cottage walls, carrying with it the faint, acrid scent of burnt sage, and something deeper, something old. Outside, the forest loomed under a bruised twilight sky, the trees flickering at the edges like embers caught in a slow breath. Inside, Ginny knelt before the hearth, tracing the scorched symbols etched into the stone with her fingertips. The marks pulsed faintly, a dull red glow that throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Harry stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his Auror robe singed at the hem. He'd been watching her for nearly 10 minutes. Saying nothing, the firelight danced across his face, carving shadows beneath his eyes, lines Ginny remembered from the war, from sleepless nights in the tent, from the weight of a world too heavy for one man to carry. "It's not just fire," she said without turning. "It's remembering." He stepped forward, boots creaking on the worn floorboards. "I don't understand most of what you're doing, but I know you're close." She let out a soft breath, her fingers stilling. "You used to understand me." The silence that followed was thick, charged, like the air before a storm breaks. A log cracked in the hearth, sending up a spiral of glowing cinders that swirled like fireflies before vanishing into the dark chimney. "I didn't mean to stop," he said finally, voice low. "Understanding you. I didn't know how to stay." She turned then, her eyes sharp, but not unkind. "You never said that. I didn't know it myself until now." He leaned against the mantel, fingers brushing the ancient runes beside her. "After the war, everyone wanted me to be something. The hero, the savior. Even Kingsley, kind as he is, treated me like a weapon that needed sharpening. And you," he paused, throat working, "you were the only one who didn't want anything from me. Not fame, not answers, just me." Ginny's expression softened, but she didn't look away. "And I couldn't handle that," he admitted. "Because if you wanted me, just me, then I had to be someone worth wanting, and I didn't know who that was. So I pushed. And you let me go." She rose slowly, brushing ash from her knees. "I didn't let you go. You left. And I needed to find myself too. Quidditch wasn't just a career. It was freedom. And when that was gone, I had to rebuild from nothing. I should have been there," he said, voice cracking. "When you got hurt, when you stopped flying. I read the article in the Prophet. I meant to write, to visit. But every time I picked up a quill, I felt like I had no right. Like I'd forfeited that part of your life. Ginny stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of green in his tired eyes. You didn't forfeit anything, Harry. You were healing. So was I. We just did it in different worlds. But we're here now, he said, almost a question. Yes, she whispered. And this fire, it's not random. It's responding to emotion, to unresolved things. That's why it spared the children. It knows. He looked into the hearth, where the flames now curled into shapes, brief flickering images of hands, reaching, mouths calling. Do you think it's trying to tell us something? Maybe, she said. Or maybe it's just reflecting what we won't say. He turned to her, the weight of years pressing in his gaze. I never stopped caring, Ginny, not for a day. I just didn't know how to love you without losing myself. And I was afraid, terrified, that if I came back, I'd ruin what we had. She reached up, her hand brushing his cheek, smudging soot across his skin. Maybe love isn't about holding on tight. Maybe it's about learning not to run. Outside, the wind stilled. The flames in the hearth dimmed, then rose again, not wild, but steady, like a pulse finding its rhythm. And for the first time in years they stood together, not as the boy who lived and the girl who flew, but as two people who had burned and broken, and were learning how to glow again. The air tasted of ash and ozone, thick enough to coat the back of Ginny's throat as she raised her wand. Sparks flickered at the edge of the forest line, not orange or red, but a strange, pulsing violet blue, like veins beneath skin. They pulsed once, twice, then surged forward in tendrils that slithered across the damp earth. Beside her, Harry tensed, his breath shallow, wand already braced in a low guard. They're learning, Ginny murmured. They didn't move like this yesterday. Harry didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the flickering shapes ahead, half-formed and shifting, too fluid to be mere flame, too deliberate to be wild. They reminded her of dancers, or serpents, curling and recoiling, with something almost like intent. She tightened her grip. On 3, we cast together. Full containment, not suppression. We want to bind, not fight. He nodded once. 1, 2. Before she could reach 3, the nearest tendril lashed out like a whip. Harry pivoted, shouting, Protego. A shimmering dome erupted between them and the flame, but the flyer didn't stop. It wrapped around the barrier like smoke given teeth, seeping through the edges, hissing where it touched the charm. The shield cracked with a sound like breaking glass. Ginny staggered back. Now, their voices rose in unison, ancient syllables tumbling from their lips. Words she'd spent weeks deciphering from crumbling scrolls in the restricted section. The charm was old, older than Hogwarts, older than the Ministry. Ignis Vinctus Aeternum. Fire bound in stillness, fire made to listen. Their wands flared, gold and silver light spiraling out, weaving into a lattice that arced toward the flames. For a heartbeat, it worked. A violet tendril slowed, coiling inward, as if drawn to the light. The air hummed, charged with energy that made Ginny's hair lift from her neck. Then the fire screamed. It wasn't a sound of air and voice, but of heat and memory, raw, utteral, like a forge collapsing in on itself. The ground shook. Ginny dropped to one knee, her wand trembling in her hand. The lattice cracked, threads of light snapping like overtuned strings. No, she gasped. Hold it. Hold the line. Harry gritted his teeth, his arms shaking as he poured more magic into the charm. Sweat streaked his face, blackened by soot. It's fighting. The fire surged. Not in a wave, but in a form, a towering figure of flame and shadow, faceless yet undeniably aware. It raised a hand, and the earth split beneath their feet. Ginny rolled aside as a jet of violet fire scorched the ground where she'd knelt. Her robes caught at the hem, igniting with a cold blue flame that didn't burn, yet left her skin numb where it touched. She slapped it out, heart-hammering. Harry wasn't as fast. A tendril wrapped his forearm, searing through fabric. He cried out, not in pain, but in something deeper. Recognition. His knees buckled, and for a terrifying second his wand arm went slack. Ginny lunged, grabbing his wrist. Harry, no, don't release. He gasped, eyes wide, pupils dilated. It's not fire, he whispered. It's alive. It remembers. The flame figure paused, The screaming stopped. Silence fell, heavy and unnatural. The lattice of light was gone. The charm had failed, but the fire didn't attack. It hovered, pulsing, watching. Ginny slowly stood, pulling Harry up with her. His arm was blistered, the wound already healing with an eerie, unnatural speed, skin knitting beneath charred fabric. He stared at it, dazed. "They're not destroying," he said, voice raw. "They're trying to speak." Ginny looked into the shifting heart of the flame. No anger there, no malice, only hunger and grief. And something else, something that felt too much like longing. She lowered her wand. "Then we've been asking the wrong questions." The rain fell in silver sheets over the valley, blurring the edges of the thatched roofs and turning the cobbled streets of Elderglen into a labyrinth of rippling reflections. Inside the small, fireless hearth of the village apothecary's cottage, Ginny Weasley sat wrapped in a woolen blanket, her leg propped on a stack of old grimoires. The ache in her knee was a dull, constant companion now, less sharp than it had been 6 months ago, but no less present. It reminded her of things lost, the wind in her hair as she dove for the snitch, the roar of the crowd, the weightlessness of flight. Now her world was parchment, ink, and the slow, methodical study of flame. Across from her, Harry stirred a basin of simmering herbs, his hands steady despite the tremor she sometimes saw in his eyes. He hadn't spoken much since arriving 3 days prior, not after the fire had nearly taken him near the standing stones on the hill. The burns on his forearm were healing, but the look in his gaze, haunted, searching, had not. He moved like a man trying to outrun a memory. "You should let me look at that again," Jimmy said, her voice softer than intended. "The salve needs reapplying before moonrise." He glanced up, dark circles under his eyes. "It's fine. It's not fine. You flinch when the wind rattles the shutters. That's not just pain, Harry. That's something else." He exhaled, long and slow, then sat across from her, the basin between them sending up curls of steam that smelled of brimstone and lavender. The fire, it didn't just burn, it spoke, not in words, but in images. "I saw Sirius. I saw Dumbledore. I saw you falling from your broom." Ginny stilled. "It showed me the same." Their eyes met, and for the first time in years, there was no pretense between them, no titles, no expectations. Just two people who had carried too much, alone. "I've been studying ancient Idmis lore," she said, breaking the silence. "Not just spell work, real fire magic. The kind that predates wands. The kind tied to emotion. There's a legend about a flame born from unspoken grief. It doesn't destroy, it reflects. It feeds on what we bury." Harry turned his palm upward, watching the steam twist above it. "So it's not attacking the village, it's responding." "To loss," Ginny nodded. Elderglen was once a sanctuary for firewalkers, people who could commune with flame, but they were hunted, their magic suppressed. The land remembers that. And now, with everything we've all been holding inside, it's awakening. He looked at her then, really looked, seeing not just the woman who once played seeker, but the scholar, the seeker of deeper truths. "You think it's not meant to be stopped. I think it's meant to be heard," she whispered. "Like grief, like regret. You can't curse it away, you can't fight it. You have to let it burn through you." Outside, the wind shifted. A flicker of orange light pulsed beneath the doorframe, not violent, but steady like a heartbeat. The rain didn't touch it. Harry reached out, fingers brushing hers. "When you fell, I wasn't there." "You didn't know," she said. "I should have. I always felt you, Ginny, even when I didn't say it." She didn't pull away. The warmth between their hands wasn't from the strange fire beyond the door. It was older, deeper, a current that had never truly gone out. And in that moment, as the sentient flame hummed beneath the storm, they both understood. Some fires aren't meant to be extinguished. They are meant to be witnessed, held, understood, like love, like loss, like coming home. The wind howled through the cracked shutters of the old stone cottage, carrying with it the faint, acrid scent of wood smoke, and something older, something dry and charred, like memory turned to ash. Ginny stood by the hearth, her fingers tracing the faint runes etched into the mantelpiece. They pulsed faintly under her touch, warm but not burning, like the breath of a sleeping beast. Across the room, Auror Voss shuffled forward, leaning heavily on a staff carved from blackened yew. Her eyes, milky with age but sharp with knowing, fixed on Ginny. "You feel it, don't you?" she asked, voice rasping like embers shifting in the dark. "Not just heat, intent." Ginny nodded. "It watches, it listens." "Because it's not fire," Auror said, lowering herself into a chair with a groan. "Not as you understand it. This is heart fire, the oldest of the elementals, born from sorrow so deep it refused to die." Harry stepped inside, shaking rain from his cloak. "Sorrow?" Auror turned her gaze to him. "You've seen the villagers, their eyes hollow, their homes untouched by flame, yet still smoldering from within. That's not destruction, that's reflection. The fire shows them what they've buried, and it feeds on what they refuse to mourn." A silence settled, thick as soot. Ginny glanced at Harry. She hadn't seen him look so still since the war. "It's not natural," he said at last. "Fires don't choose who to burn." "This one does," Auror replied. "It seeks the wounded, those who carry grief like a second skin. It doesn't rage, it whispers. And when it finds a heart cracked open by loss, it takes root." She reached into the folds of her robe and pulled out a brittle scroll, its edges singed. With careful hands, she unrolled it on the table. Faded ink depicted a figure wreathed in flame, not consuming but cradling a weeping woman. Beneath it, words in an ancient script shimmered faintly. "This is the tale of Malus," Auror said, "a healer from the northern valleys. When her daughter died in the Great Plague, Malus refused to weep. She buried her child in silence, buried her pain beneath duty, but the earth would not keep the girl's spirit. It rose, not as a ghost, but as fire, not vengeful, not cruel, waiting." Ginny leaned closer. Waiting for what? For her mother to grieve. The words hung in the air. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to lean toward them. "For 12 winters, the flame followed Malus," Auror continued. "It lit her path, warmed her home, but never harmed her, until the day she finally broke, collapsed in the snow, screaming her daughter's name. And the fire, it embraced her, not to burn, to release. When the villagers found her, the snow around her was untouched, but her hands were clean. The sorrow was gone." Harry exhaled slowly. "You're saying this fire, it's not attacking, it's trying to heal. In its way," Auror said. "It doesn't understand silence. It doesn't understand pride. It only knows pain, and the truth that unwept tears turn to ash inside the soul." Ginny looked down at her own hands. She thought of the pitch, the roar of the crowd, the moment her body twisted wrong in the air. The end of a dream. She'd never cried for it. Not really. She'd buried it under research, under restless nights poring over dusty tomes on flame resistance and elemental wards. And now the fire had come. "You felt it called to you, haven't you?" Auror asked softly. Ginny didn't answer, but the fire in the hearth rose slightly, curling like a question. Harry reached for her hand. His fingers were cold. "We've both been running," he said, "from what we lost, from what we couldn't say." Outside, the wind died. The village was quiet. But in the distance, a single flame flickered to life atop the abandoned chapel. A steady, unwavering glow, like a candle left in a window for someone coming home. The wind carried the scent of burnt pine, and something sharper, ozone maybe, or the ghost of lightning trapped in ash. Ginny stood barefoot on the blackened stones of the clearing, her toes curling against the still warm earth. Smoke curled in lazy spirals from the center of the circle, where a single flame flickered, low and watchful. It wasn't fire as most knew it. This one breathed. It pulsed like a heartbeat, dimming and brightening in rhythm with something deep beneath the soil. She exhaled slowly, lowering herself into a crouch. Her hands hovered just above the ground, palms open. "It's not about force," she whispered, more to herself than to the flame. "It's about listening." A gust stirred the trees, and the flame leapt, angry, sudden. Ginny flinched, pulling her hands back. Heat lashed across her skin, not enough to burn, but close. Too close. Her pulse spiked, and the fire answered, swelling higher, its color shifting from gold to a volatile red-orange. "No," she said firmer this time, "not like that." She closed her eyes. In the dark behind her lids, she saw the pitch at Hogwarts, the wind tearing at her robes as she banked hard around a goalpost, the roar of the crowd, the sting of rain on her face, the perfect fierce joy of flight, gone in an instant when her bruise snapped like a dry twig, sending her spiraling into the stands. The healers said she was lucky. No broken bones, just torn ligaments, nerve damage in her shoulder. But Quidditch didn't care about luck. It cared about precision, speed, control, and she'd lost all three. She took a breath, then another, focused on the rhythm, in, out. Let the memory dissolve like smoke. When she opened her eyes, the flame had calmed, shrinking back to its low golden flicker. It watched her, almost curious. "Good," she murmured. "That's better." She reached out again, slower this time. No demands, no expectations, just presence. The heat licked at her skin, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she imagined warmth. Not destruction, not rage, but the quiet glow of a hearth. The kind of fire that held stories, not secrets. The flame shifted, leaned toward her hand. Ginny held her breath. It didn't touch her, but it danced, just above the stone, tracing a pattern, like writing in a language she almost understood. Her heart fluttered, not with fear, but with something quieter. Recognition. "That's it," she whispered. "You're not trying to hurt me. You're trying to say something." Behind her, a twink snapped. She turned sharply, and the flame hissed, curling in on itself like a threatened animal. Harry stood at the edge of the clearing, his Auror robe singed at the hem, his face smudged with soot. He held his wand low, but his stance was tense. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said. "I saw the smoke." Ginny stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "You startled the fire, not me." He glanced at the flickering light, now wary and low. "It's reacting to you. It's learning to trust me," she said, "and I'm learning not to fight it." Harry stepped forward, cautious. "You're not using spells, not even a basic agumenti. No, water only makes it worse. This fire, it doesn't want to be put out, it wants to be heard." He studied her, really studied her, in a way he hadn't since they were younger, since they'd both walked away from something they never named. "You've changed," he said quietly. A breeze stirred the ashes between them. The flame, emboldened, stretched toward Ginny again, touching the edge of her sleeve, just a whisper of heat, before retreating. "So have you," she said, "but maybe we're not as different as we thought." Harry didn't answer, but he lowered his wand all the way, and for the first time since he'd arrived, the fire didn't flinch. The wind howled through the cracked shutters of the inn, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, and something sharper, wood smoke, laced with a strange coppery tang that made Harry's scar prickle faintly, a ghost of old pain. He sat on the edge of the narrow bed, boots still on, cloak heavy with rain. His fingers traced the rim of a chipped porcelain cup, the tea within long gone cold. Outside, the village of Ember Hollow slept uneasily, its rooftops slick under a bruised twilight sky. He had been here 3 days, and still no answers, only whispers, fear in the eyes of farmers, and flames that moved like living things, curling around doorframes before vanishing into the night. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and exhaled slowly. The weight of his wand at his side felt heavier than usual. Not the oak and phoenix feather itself, but what he represented. The expectation, the constant pull toward danger, the way people looked at him not as Harry, but as the one who would fix it. Again, always, he had thought, after the war, that peace would feel like stillness. Instead, it felt like waiting, like every quiet moment was borrowed, a pause before the next storm. And so, he'd become an Auror, not because he loved the chase, but because it was the only place where the chaos inside him made sense, where action silenced the echoes. But this wasn't dark wizards or curses with names whispered in fear. This was fire that didn't burn the wrong things, that spared children, followed patterns, retreated when spoken to in tones too low to catch. It was intelligent, and it was tired, he thought. Like him. A memory surfaced. Ginny, years ago, laughing on the Quidditch pitch, hair streaming behind her like a banner. She had moved like fire herself, fierce, untamed, beautiful in motion. And then the fall The silence that followed. He hadn't known how to reach her then, not really. He'd offered words, clumsy ones, and she'd smiled, thanked him, and vanished into the library stacks, chasing some obscure text on flame-resistant charms. He'd thought it was grief. Now he wondered if it had been the same thing that drove him. This need to do, to understand, to prove that even when broken, you could still be useful. He rubbed his temples. The Ministry expected a report by week's end. Kingsley would want containment strategies, risk assessments. But how do you contain something that chooses when to burn? How do you fight a force that seems to mourn as much as it destroys? His fingers brushed the letter in his pocket. Ginny's handwriting, sharp and familiar. She hadn't said much, just that she was close, that she'd heard about the fires, that she was coming. He hadn't replied, not because he didn't want to see her, but because seeing her meant facing the years he'd spent running, toward missions, toward duty, toward anything that wasn't the quiet ache of missing her. He had told himself it was protection, that she deserved a life without shadows, but maybe it was just easier to be the hero than the man. The wind shifted, and through the thin wall he heard the low murmur of the innkeeper praying. Somewhere beyond the hills, a flame flickered in the dark, not red but deep gold, like old magic waking. He stood, shrugging off the cloak, and reached for his wand. Duty called. It always did. But for the first time in years he wondered what it might feel like to let someone else carry the weight. To stand in the fire, not to fight it, but to see what it had to say. The air tasted of ash and something older, like burnt parchment and forgotten incense. Ginny stood at the edge of the scorched clearing, her boots pressing into the brittle earth. Before her, the fire danced, not with the reckless hunger of wildfire, but with intention. It pulsed in slow waves, rising and falling like breath. Orange tongues curled upward, then dimmed to deep crimson, only to flare again in silent rhythm. She didn't step back. She hadn't flinched since it first called her name. Ginny. She blinked. Not Harry's voice. Not now. But the fire had shaped itself, just for a moment, into the silhouette of a younger boy, with messy hair and round spectacles, standing beneath the apple tree, at the burrow. Then it shifted. The flames softened, warmed, and suddenly she was 12 again, laughing as she raced Ron and Harry through the golden light of a late summer afternoon. She could smell cut grass and warm bread. She could feel the tickle of dandelions against her bare legs. The memory shimmered, vivid as a spell-trapped moment. Then the fire twisted. The warmth vanished. The scent of bread turned to smoke, thick, suffocating. The apple tree blackened, its branches cracking like bones. The boy in glasses turned, and it wasn't Harry anymore. It was him, Tom. His smile too smooth, eyes too dark, voice a whisper that slithered through the crackle of burning wood. Ginny's breath caught. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, nails biting into her palms. She had spent years locking that memory away, burying it beneath Quidditch dives and late-night training, behind the roar of crowds and the sting of bludgers. But the fire didn't care about walls. You were never strong enough. The flame seemed to hiss, forming a gaunt hand reaching toward her. "You let me in." "No," she said, her voice low but firm. "I was a child. I was tricked." The fire flickered, as if considering. Then, without warning, it shifted again. This time, warmth returned, but different. Golden and quiet. She was on a broom, soaring above the Quidditch pitch at Hogwarts, wind in her hair, the roar of the crowd a distant hum. She'd just scored. Her teammates lifted her onto their shoulders. She was 16, alive, untouchable. The joy was so sharp it ached. And then impact, a bludger, unseen, a sickening crack, her shoulder dislocating mid-dive, the world tilting, pain erupting like lightning through her nerves. The cheers turned to gasps, the sky blurred with tears. She remembered lying on the infirmary bed, Madame Pomfrey's hands gentle but helpless, the diagnosis hanging in the air like a death sentence. No more professional Quidditch. The joint won't hold. Ginny swayed on her feet. Her breath came fast. The fire mirrored her turmoil, swelling and shrinking in time with her pulse. It wasn't just showing her pain. It was showing her truth, how joy and sorrow were never separate, but woven together, threads of the same cloth. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. The flames stilled. For a heartbeat they dimmed to embers. Then, slowly, they shaped into two figures, side by side, one young, red-haired, grinning, as she caught a snitch in midair. The other, older, standing in a dimly lit study, surrounded by scrolls and jars of glowing ash. Both were her. Both were real. And between them, a single word formed in the smoke. Remember. She didn't move. The heat licked at her skin, but she didn't burn. The fire wasn't punishing her. It was speaking. Not in language, but in feeling. Raw, unfiltered. It knew her. Not just her scars, but her fire. The same fire that once carried her across the Quidditch. Pitch now burned quieter, deeper. Not extinguished, transformed. Behind her, footsteps crunched on ash. She didn't turn. She already knew who it was. "Ginny," Harry said, voice rough with concern. "You shouldn't be this close." She raised a hand, not to stop him, but to show she was unharmed. "It's not trying to hurt me," she said, eyes still on the flames. "It's trying to tell me something." The fire pulsed once, gently, like a heartbeat. And for the first time in years, Ginny didn't look away. The wind carried the scent of charred earth and damp moss as Ginny stepped over the cracked threshold of the abandoned greenhouse. Inside, the glass panes were blackened, not from soot, but from a kind of crystallized frost. Like fire had burned so hot, it left behind its opposite. Her fingers brushed the wall, and a faint warmth pulsed beneath the surface, like a heartbeat buried in stone. She exhaled, watching her breath curl into the air, not from cold, but from the strange inversion of temperature that clung to this place. Harry followed close behind, his Auror robes pulled tight against the unnatural chill. "This wasn't an accident," he said, crouching beside a furrow in the soil, where scorched roots curled upward, as if recoiling even in death. Something dug into the earth, on purpose. Ginny knelt beside him, brushing dirt from a fragment of pottery. The sharp bore a carved spiral, glowing faintly when her thumb traced its edge. "It's a binding sigil," she murmured. Older than Hogwarts, I think. This village, they didn't just live here. They worked with fire. Not just controlled it. Communed with it." Harry frowned. "You're saying they had a pact with whatever's causing these flames?" "I'm saying they broke it." She turned the shard over. "This symbol, it's a covenant mark. I've seen it in the restricted archives, in texts about elemental pacts. When wizards bond with an elemental force, they offer balance in return for power. But look at the break in the spiral. This was severed violently. Not dissolved, broken. A gust rattled the remaining glass, and for a moment the shadows in the corner shimmered, not with heat but with something deeper, like memory given form. Ginny froze. "Did you see that?" Harry drew his wand, but not in threat, more in reverence. "I felt it. Like someone whispered in a language I almost remember." They left the greenhouse and moved toward the center of the village, where a stone well stood encircled by scorched stones. The villagers had refused to come this far, whispering about the heart fire that slept beneath. But Ginny had studied the patterns. The fires always began near the well, then spread outward in controlled bursts, never touching certain homes, always avoiding the eastern path. "It's selective," she said. "It's not mindless destruction. It's grieving." Harry looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her not just as the girl he once loved, but as someone who had stepped into a light he'd never fully understood. "You knew this would be different. That's why you came." She met his gaze. "I spent years chasing fire in Quidditch. Speed, risk, the burn of the wind. When I couldn't fly anymore, I thought I'd lost it. But fire isn't just destruction, it's transformation. And this is something ancient. It remembers being respected." They descended the well together, ropes anchored to stone, the air growing warmer with each foot. At the bottom, the walls pulsed with veins of molten light, slow and rhythmic. In the center, half buried in ash, lay a stone tablet etched with the same spiral. Ginny brushed it clean, and the moment her skin touched the surface, images flickered in the air, ghosts of the past. They saw villagers kneeling, hands pressed to the earth, as a river of liquid flame rose from the ground, gentle as sunlight. It curled around seedlings, feeding them, warming the soil through long winters. A woman, robed in red, her hair braided with copper thread, spoke to the flame as one would to a child. There was harmony. Then the vision twisted, men with iron tools, faces twisted with greed, digging into the fire's source. They forged weapons, overloaded the fields, demanded more than balance. The flame recoiled, then raged. The woman tried to stop them, but they bound her, broke the sigil carved into the stone, and the fire screamed. Ginny gasped, pulling her hand back. The image vanished, but the echo of that scream lingered in her bones. "They used it," Harry said, voice low. "They turned a partner into a tool." Ginny nodded, eyes wet, and when it fought back, they called it a monster. Above, the sky darkened. A flicker of orange bloomed on the horizon, not distant, but close. The fire was waking again, and this time it knew they had seen the truth. The wind howled through the valley like a thing wounded, carrying with it the scent of charred earth, and something sharper, ozone maybe, or the metallic tang of raw magic. Ginny knelt in the center of the chalk circle, her fingers pressed into the damp soil, tracing the ancient runes she'd spent 3 sleepless nights copying from a crumbling tome found beneath the ruins of Elderglen Abbey. Her palms stung from the salt and crushed phoenix ash she'd mixed into the binding paste. Around her the stones stood like broken teeth, remnants of a forgotten druidic ring, humming faintly beneath the moonlight. Harry stood just outside the circle, wand in one hand, the other clenched at his side. His breath fogged in the cold air. "You're sure about this?" Ginny didn't look up. "No. But we're out of time. The fire took old man Cedric's barn 2 nights ago, and it didn't burn the wood. It burned the memory of the barn. The scent of hay, the sound of horses, gone. Like it was never there." Harry swallowed. "And you think speaking to it will help?" "I think it's not just fire," she said, voice low. "It remembers, Harry. It grieves. And if we don't understand why, it won't stop until there's nothing left to remember." She reached out, her hands trembling slightly. "Come in, you have to complete the circle." He hesitated. "You said blood." "For balance, not much. Just enough to bind us, to make the connection real." He stepped over the line. The moment his boot touched the inner ring, the wind died. A silence so complete fell that Ginny could hear the pulse in her own ears. She pricked her thumb with the silver needle, then guided Harry's hand to do the same. Their blood, mingling on the central sigil, sizzled like rain on hot stone. "Repeat after me," she whispered. He nodded, voice tight. "All right." The incantation was old, so old it felt more like breathing than speaking. Ginny began, syllables curling from her lips like smoke. Harry followed, his voice rough but clear. The air above the sigil shimmered, then split, not with flame but with light. A column of gold and crimson spiraled upward, coiling like a serpent made of sunset. Then it spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in images, flashes that slammed into their minds like falling stars. A village, untouched by war, children laughing in fields of fire bloom. A woman with hair like molten copper, hands outstretched, singing to the hearth fire as it danced in response. A betrayal, steel in the dark, the woman falling, her last breath a whisper of flame. The fire, wounded, enraged, rising not to destroy, but to remember. Ginny gasped, tears streaking her cheeks. She wasn't a witch, she was its keeper, its voice. Harry gripped her shoulder, and when they killed her, the fire became orphaned. Lost. It doesn't want to burn, it wants to be heard. The light pulsed softer now. A question, gentle as embers cooling. Ginny closed her eyes. "We hear you," she said, not in English, but in the old tongue, the one she'd only ever seen in dreams. "We remember." The fire dimmed. The wind returned, but this time it carried the scent of rain and blooming time. The stones stopped humming. The circle, once charged with power, crumbled into dust. Harry sank to his knees beside her. "Did it?" She nodded. "It's not gone, but it's no longer angry. It's waiting." "For what?" "For someone to sing back." He looked at her. Really looked. Saw the firelight in her eyes. The quiet strength that had always been there. Long before Quidditch. Long before fame. "You already are, aren't you?" She smiled, small and true. "Maybe I always was." The fire didn't burn the stones. That was the first thing Ginny noticed. It curled around the ancient standing stones like a lover's hand, licking at the moss but leaving no scorch, no ash. It pulsed in rhythm, slow, deliberate, like a heartbeat made visible. She crouched low behind a crumbling wall, her breath shallow, her fingers brushing the rough surface of a charred book she'd salvaged from the village's ruined library. The words inside had been half-eaten by flame, but one phrase kept repeating. It remembers what it was. Beside her, Harry stirred. His hand rested on the hilt of his wand, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. His green eyes were fixed on the flames, narrowed not in fear, but in recognition. "It's not attacking," he murmured. "It's waiting." Ginny swallowed. "It's not fire. Not really. It's something wearing fire like a skin." A gust of wind should have scattered the flames. Instead, it stilled. The flames drew inward, coiling into a pillar that shimmered with hues deeper than any natural blaze, crimson bleeding into violet, gold flaring at the edges, like a dying star. Then, a voice, not from the air, but from the fire itself, resonant and layered, as if many voices spoke at once, whispering through crackling embers. "You have returned, not to destroy, to listen." Ginny's pulse spiked. She'd theorized, written pages in her journals, about sentient flame, about emotion crystallized into magic. But this was beyond theory. This was history breathing. "Who are you?" Harry asked, voice low but steady. "I am what remains, what was cast out, what loved too fiercely, and was called a monster." The fire shifted, and within its core, shapes began to form. A woman, slender, her hair like molten copper, standing on a cliff beneath a storm-racked sky. Her arms were outstretched, not in defiance, but in sorrow. Around her, villagers raised wands and torches, their faces twisted in fear. "She wasn't attacking them," Ginny whispered. "She was grieving. She was heartbroken," the fire answered. "Her love was forbidden. When he died, she called to the earth, to the sky, to the breath between stars. She asked only to feel him one more time, and the world answered, but they saw only the fire. They named her curse. They sealed her into the land. They thought they buried her pain. But fire cannot die. It only waits." The image changed. The woman was gone. In her place, a single flame, buried beneath stone, smoldering for centuries, fed by memory, by injustice, by the unspoken truth of a heart too vast to be contained. Ginny pressed a hand to her chest. She knew that ache. The way Quidditch had been more than sport, it had been flight, freedom, identity. And when her shoulder shattered, when the healer said she'd never grip a broom with power again, it wasn't the pain that haunted her. It was the silence, the loss of voice. "You're not a curse," she said, rising slowly. "You're a story they never wanted to hear." The fire pulsed, softer now. "They called me Wildfire, but I was born from love, from a heart that refused to let go." Harry looked at Ginny, really looked at her, as if seeing her anew. "You understand it," he said. "I've spent months studying fire because I thought I could control it," she admitted. "But maybe I was looking for something else. Maybe I was looking for proof that not everything lost has to be gone." The flames swayed toward her, not with heat, but with something like reverence. "You carry embers too. I taste them in your breath, the fire in your chest, the one you quiet, the one that still wants to fly." Tears pricked Ginny's eyes. She didn't wipe them away. Harry stepped forward, not with his wand but with his hands open at his sides. "We're not here to put you out," he said. "We're here to remember you." For a long moment, the fire stood still. Then, slowly, it sank into the earth, not vanishing, but retreating, like a breath drawn inward. The stones glowed faintly, warm to the touch. The air smelled of rain and old parchment, of hearths long cooled. Ginny exhaled. "It's not gone," she said. "It's resting," Harry nodded. "And this time, it's not alone." Above them the clouds parted. A single star blinked into view, bright, persistent, like a promise whispered across centuries. Rain lashed the thatched roofs of Amber Hollow like 1,000 whispering fingers, each drop sizzling the moment it touched the scorched cobbles. Ginny stood at the edge of the village square, her boots sinking slightly into the mud, breath curling in pale wisps before her. The air still carried the ghost of fire, dry, acrid, alive. Not the clean burn of hearths or cauldrons, but something older, hungrier. She pulled her cloak tighter, the fabric singed at the hem from yesterday's flare-up. Behind her a cottage groaned as the last of its support beams cracked and collapsed inward. No one screamed. The villagers had long stopped reacting to destruction they couldn't fight. Harry emerged from the smoke, his Auror robe streaked with soot, face drawn. He wiped a hand across his brow and left a dark smear. "It happened again," he said, voice low. Near the old well, the flames didn't just ignite. They moved, like they were searching for something. Ginny nodded. She'd seen it too, in the flicker of shadows against stone, flames that curled like hands, that recoiled from water, not with violence, but sorrow. "They're not random," she said. "They're remembering." She looked at her, eyes narrowing. "Remembering what?" He turned toward the ruins, where the last embers pulsed faintly beneath the rubble. "I found something in the archives at Hogwarts. A witch. Her name was Lysara Valen, late 12th century. She was a master of pyromancy, but not like we understand it. She didn't control fire, she spoke to it." Harry exhaled slowly. And her lover, a warrior named Cale, died in the Battle of Durnmore Pass. Killed by a cursed blade, Lysara. She didn't bury him. She burned his body in a ritual older than the Ministry, invoking the spirit of flame to carry his soul beyond death. A gust of wind stirred the ashes at their feet, lifting them in a slow spiral. Ginny watched them rise, her voice softening. But something went wrong. Or maybe it went exactly as she intended. She bound her grief to the fire. Her love, her rage, her refusal to let go. The flames took it all, and they never stopped burning. Harry glanced at the ruins, then back at her. "You're saying this fire, it's not cursed. It's her." "In a way," Ginny said. "Not her body, her sorrow, her love. It became self-aware. It learned to survive. And now, centuries later, it's still looking for him." Silence fell between them, broken only by the distant crackle of a smoldering barn. Harry crouched, brushing his fingers over a stone cracked by heat. "So it's not attacking, it's searching." "Yes, every time someone lights a fire here, it awakens. It thinks, hopes that Kyle's spire might rise from the smoke, but all it finds is emptiness. And the more it fails, the more it burns." Harry stood, his jaw tight. "We can't just let it keep destroying the village." "No," Ginny said, "but we can't fight it either. Not with water, not with spells. This fire isn't an enemy. It's a heart that won't stop breaking." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, charred locket, twisted metal, barely recognizable. "I found this in the ruins of her cottage. It was buried under the hearth. I think it's all that's left of him." Harry looked at it, then at her. "What do we do?" Ginny closed her fingers around the locket. The metal was warm. "We give it peace, not by putting the fire out, but by helping it let go." A low hum rose from the earth, faint at first, then growing. The ashes around them began to swirl, not in chaos, but in patterns, circles, spirals, the shape of a hand reaching. Somewhere deep beneath the village, something ancient was listening, and for the first time in centuries it felt understood. The wind carried ash and the faint scent of burnt cedar as Ginny knelt in the cracked earth, her fingers brushing the edge of a scorched rune etched into the stone. It pulsed faintly, like a dying ember beneath her touch, warm but not painful. Around her, the village of Ember Hollow lay hushed under a bruised twilight sky, homes dark, windows shuttered against the night. The fire had come again last night, quiet, deliberate, sparing lives, but leaving walls blackened and doors sealed with molten hinges. She exhaled, watching her breath curl into the cooling air. "It's not wild," she murmured, more to herself than to the figure approaching behind her. "It chooses, it listens." Harry stopped a few feet away, his Auror cloak pulled tight against the chill. His glasses caught the last of the daylight, shattering his eyes, but she knew that look, the furrow between his brows, the quiet tension in his jaw. He had spent weeks chasing reports of cursed blazes, only to find nothing but silence and sorrow in their wake. Now, standing at the edge of the scorched square, he seemed both weary and wary. "I saw it last night," he said. "Not flames, not exactly. It moved like water, but with purpose. It circled a child's window, then turned away." Ginny looked up at him. It didn't want to harm her. "How do you know that?" "Because fire like this doesn't just spare, it protects, or warns." She stood, brushing dirt from her palms. This isn't destruction, Harry. It's memory. He stepped closer, studying the rune. You think it's tied to the old wards? The ones the villagers say were broken generations ago? She nodded. The stories say the founders bound a spirit to the land, something born of volcanic ash and sacrifice. When the pact was broken, the spirit slept, but sleep isn't death, and now it's waking, or being woken. She met his gaze. Something's changed. Something here feels alive. The silence stretched between them, heavier than the smoke in the air. It had always been like this with them. Moments of quiet understanding that needed no words, threaded through years of distance and duty. She had watched him from afar, the boy who became a legend, the man who carried the world on his shoulders. And he had seen her too, the fierce chaser who flew like fire given form, now grounded, searching for answers in ancient texts and forgotten spells. He reached out, brushing a smudge of soot from her cheek. The touch lingered, brief but warm. You've been up all night again. I'm close, she said softly. There's a pattern in the burns, like a language, not Latin. Older. I think it's trying to tell us something. He looked at her then, not just at the scholar, the researcher, but at Ginny, the girl who once laughed in the face of danger, who kissed him under fireworks, and walked away with her head high. You always were better with fire than I was. She smiled faintly. You never gave it a chance. You see it as something to control, to put out. And you? I see it as something that wants to be heard. She turned back to the road. Like grief, like anger, like love. It doesn't want to be silenced. It wants to be witnessed. He didn't answer right away. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the wind stirred the cinders at their feet. Then softly he said, I've spent so long trying to keep things under control, to make sure no one gets hurt. But maybe I've been afraid of the wrong things. She turned to him, her red hair catching the dim light like a slow-burning wick. Maybe the fire isn't the danger, Harry. Maybe the danger is ignoring it. And then, for the first time in years, he didn't reach for his wand. He reached for her hand. The sky over Aldecroft burned a sickly orange, not from sunset, but from the pulse of flames that coiled around the village like serpents testing their prey. Trees smoldered without collapsing, their bark blackened but still standing like sentinels of ash. The air tasted of iron and old smoke, thick enough to coat the back of Ginny's throat as she crouched behind the crumbling stone wall of what had once been the village apothecary. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from the pull. The fire called to her, not in words, but in whispers felt through the marrow of her bones. It's not attacking, she murmured, more to herself than to Harry, who knelt beside her, wand clenched in a white-knuckled grip. It's reacting. Harry didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the center of the village square, where ministry containment teams in slate-gray robes had erected shimmering silver barriers around the largest concentration of flame. Aurors, bureaucrats with wands and orders. They moved with precision, chanting incantations in clipped, practiced tones. Jets of enchanted ice and conjured rain lanced outward, striking the fire in sharp bursts. And the fire screamed. It wasn't a sound any human throat could produce, a low, guttural roar that split the air, like thunder, cracking open the sky. The flames surged, twisting into a spiraling column that rose 10 feet high, its core glowing violet at the edges. The silver barriers flickered, then buckled like paper in a storm. They're making it worse, Ginny said, rising to her feet despite Harry's sharp intake of breath. It's not wild magic. It's wounded. Ginny, stay back, Harry whispered, catching her wrist. Those are senior Aurors. They know what they're doing, do they? She turned to him, eyes blazing. Or do they just know how to crush things they don't understand? Before he could answer, a new voice cut through the chaos. Ms. Weasley, step away from the perimeter. That's an order. It was Auror Varn, a tall man with a face like chiseled stone and a voice to match. His badge gleamed under the unnatural light. Deputy Head of Magical Threat Containment. This isn't a threat, Ginny snapped, wrenching her arm free. It's responding to your aggression. You're not containing it. You're provoking it. Varn's jaw tightened. We've lost 2 teens already. 3 wizards burned alive, not by heat, but by absorption. The fire took their magic, their breath, their will. This is not some experimental charm gone wrong. It's sentient, And it's hostile. It's scared, Ginny countered. You don't cage a creature like this. You listen. And how exactly do you propose we do that? Varn sneered. With poetry? She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward, past the wall, past the safety line, into the open square. The ground beneath her boots crackled, but the flames near her feet curled back, as if recoiling from recognition. Ginny, no, Harry shouted. But she kept walking. The fire shifted. The vortex slowed. The violet glow dimmed to ember red, pulsing like a heartbeat. In that moment, Ginny felt it. The weight of centuries, the sting of betrayal, the slow suffocation of being buried beneath spells meant to suppress, not understand. She raised her hands, palms outward, not in defense, but in offering. It remembers, she whispered. It remembers when it was sacred, when witches and wizards didn't fight it, but fed it songs, not spells. Behind her, Varn barked an order. A jet of enchanted frost shot from an Auror's wand, aimed not at the fire, but at Ginny. Harry moved before thought. A shield charm erupted between her and the ice bolt, shattering it in mid-air. Stand down, he roared, stepping into the square beside her. You don't know what you're dealing with. The fire flared again, but not in anger, in recognition. It split into two streams, one curling around Ginny's outstretched hand, the other reaching toward Harry, not burning, but brushing his cheek like a long-lost memory. And in that touch, he saw it. A woman in robes of flame, standing on a hill beneath a blood-red moon, chanting in a language older than Hogwarts. Then the vision faded. Varn's voice trembled now. What are they doing? No one answered, because the fire had gone still, and for the first time in weeks, Aldercroft held its breath. The wind screamed through the thatched roofs, carrying embers like fallen stars. Ginny stood on the cobbled edge of the village square, her hair whipping across her face, eyes reflecting the orange pulse of the inferno consuming the eastern cottages. It wasn't natural fire. She could feel it, a presence, a breath, a heartbeat in the flames. They danced with intention, curling around timber beams like fingers, climbing stone chimneys only to leap sideways, defying gravity. Smoke coiled in thick, suffocating ropes, stinging her lungs with every breath. Ginny! Harry's voice cut through the roar, raw and urgent. He stumbled from the haze, his Auror robe singed at the hem, face streaked with soot. One hand clutched his wand, the other pressed against a deep gash on his forearm. They won't listen, he gasped, dropping beside her behind the low wall of the apothecary's shop. The villagers, they're trapped in the cellar beneath the mill. The flames are blocking the door, but they're moving, like they're guarding it. Ginny nodded, her fingers tightening around the leather-bound journal in her lap. Pages fluttered in the heat, filled with sketches of flame patterns, notations on ancient runes tied to elemental binding. It's not guarding, she said, voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. It's protecting. Something's down there. Something it thinks is in danger. Harry stared at her. You're saying the fire's alive, that it's choosing? It's not just fire, she whispered. It's a spirit, bound long ago, maybe by someone who didn't understand it. Now the seal's broken, and it's reacting, to fear, to violence, to magic thrown at it. Every curse makes it stronger. A deafening crack split the air, as the mill's roof collapsed inward, sending a fountain of sparks into the bruised sky. The fire surged, not outward, but inward, coiling around the ruin like a serpent guarding its eggs. For a heartbeat the flames pulsed in unison, a slow, rhythmic throb, like a vast chest rising and falling. Ginny closed her eyes. She remembered the first time she'd felt fire speak, not with words, but with warmth, with memory. It had been after her fall, when pain had left her numb. She'd lit a candle in her room, and instead of shrinking from the flame, she'd leaned in, watching how it bent toward her, how it flickered in response to her breath. That was the beginning. Not control, conversation. We can't fight it, she said, opening her eyes. Not with spells. We have to show it. We're not a threat. Harry looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to walk into that and talk to it? I want to listen, she corrected. And maybe let it feel us, not as attackers, as something else. Another scream echoed from the cellar, faint, desperate. The fire flared higher, responding to the fear. Ginny rose, leaving the journal behind. She stepped out from cover, arms at her sides, palms open. The heat hit her like a wall, but she didn't flinch. She walked slowly toward the ruin, toward the pulsing core of the blaze. "Ginny, no!" Harry lunged after her, but she raised a hand without turning. "Stay back. If it senses aggression, it'll react. Please." She stopped 10 paces from the edge of the fire. It roared, twisting into spirals, tendrils reaching toward her, not attacking but testing. She could feel its awareness now, ancient and wounded, like a beast, long caged, finally breaking free. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, voice soft but clear. "I know you're afraid. I know you've been alone. But those people, they're afraid too. Let them go. Let us help." The flames stilled. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of burning timber and the distant wail of the wind. Then, from the heart of the fire, a shape began to form. Not human, not animal, but a shifting mass of light and shadow, with eyes like molten gold. It hovered, watching, waiting. Ginny took another step. Her skin prickled, not with pain, but with warmth, the warmth of a hearth, of home. "I see you," she whispered. "You don't have to burn alone." The air tasted of ash and something older, charred earth, maybe, or scorched memory. Ginny stepped forward, her boots cracking brittle ground that had once been grass. Before her, the fire didn't roar. It whispered. Flames curled like fingers over the rooftops of the abandoned village, shifting hues between crimson, violet, and deep gold, as if breathing in time with a pulse beneath the soil. She didn't flinch. She'd spent months studying fire that refused to obey, fire that remembered. Harry followed close behind, wand raised but not threatening. He'd seen cursed flames before, fiend fire, mostly, but this was different. No chaos, no hunger, just quiet, deliberate movement, parting slightly as they approached, like a curtain drawn by unseen hands. "It's watching us," he murmured. Ginny nodded. "It's not attacking. That means it recognizes something. Us? Not us. Us together." She glanced at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight like embers. "I think it's been waiting." He didn't question it. Not anymore. The reports had been clear. Entire families vanished, homes untouched except for ash patterns that looked like ruins. No bodies, no traces, just silence and flame. But when Harry had traced the last Auror patrol's path, he'd found a single name carved into a stone threshold. Ginny. And now here they were, standing at the mouth of a living inferno, hearts pounding not with fear, but with something deeper, recognition. Ginny reached into her cloak and pulled out a small vial filled with swirling molten light. "This is what I've been working on. A resonance charm. It mimics the frequency of elemental fire, not to control it, but to speak to it." Harry frowned. "And if it doesn't want to speak, then we'll know soon enough." She uncorked a vial and poured the liquid into her palm. It didn't burn. Instead, it coiled around her fingers like a serpent made of sunlight. She raised her hand and the flames ahead stilled. Then, a voice, not in words, but in sensation. Heat pressed against their minds, gentle at first, then insistent. Images flickered behind their eyes. A woman with hair like flame, standing at the edge of a cliff. A child weeping in a circle of fire. A vow, spoken in a language older than Hogwarts. Ginny gasped. "It's not a curse. It's a guardian." Harry felt it too, a sorrow so vast it ached in his bones. "Guarding what?" "The balance," she whispered. "This land, it's a threshold. Between worlds, between life and whatever comes after. The fire was bound here centuries ago, to keep something sealed, but the binding is breaking. The villagers, they weren't taken, they were tested, and they failed. And if we walk in?" She turned to him, her face half shadow, half light. "We surrender. No wands, no spells, only trust. The fire won't harm us if it believes we're not trying to dominate it, but if either of us hesitates, if one thought turns to control, we burn." She took his hand. Her skin was warm, but not from the fire. "And don't think, just feel." They stepped forward. The flames parted. Heat wrapped around them, like a second skin, intense but not painful. It licked at their clothes, their hair, their breath, but did not consume. Instead, it pulsed in rhythm with their joined hearts, as if sinking to a shared frequency. Harry felt memories rise unbidden. Ginny laughing on the Quidditch pitch, her hair streaming behind her like a banner. The way she'd looked at him the night he returned from the forest. Not with awe, but sorrow. All the things they'd never said. And Ginny, she saw Harry not as the chosen one, but as the boy who'd sat with her in the Burrows orchard, whispering about dreams too fragile for daylight. The one who'd kissed her like he was afraid she'd vanish. The one who'd let her go, because he thought it was right. Tears traced paths through the soot on her cheeks, evaporating before they fell. The fire deepened. The world narrowed to heat and breathe, and the pressure of his fingers in hers. Somewhere beyond the blaze, a door began to open, not of wood or stone, but of memory, of blood, of fire that remembered its name, and they walked into it together. The air inside the inferno was not hot, it was alive. Every breath tasted of cinnamon and iron, the scent of burning magic rather than wood or flesh. Ginny stepped forward, her boots sinking slightly into the glowing ash that pulsed like slow breath beneath her feet. Around her, the flames twisted in spirals, not consuming but watching. They leaned toward her, not with hunger, but something closer to recognition. Harry followed a pace behind, wand drawn, but not raised. "It's not attacking," he murmured, voice hushed, as if speaking too loud might wake a sleeping beast. "No," Ginny said, her fingers outstretched. A tendril of flame curled toward her, brushing her palm like a cat seeking touch. "It knows me, or it knows what I've become." She had spent months, buried in ancient tomes, tracing the forgotten heart of pyromancy, not the flashy spells of schoolyard duels, but the old magic, the kind that spoke of fire as a living force, born of emotion, fed by memory. She thought it theoretical, a distraction. Now, standing in the heart of the inferno, she felt the truth of it thrumming in her bones. The village had burned for weeks, not with destruction, but with purpose. Homes untouched, people unharmed, yet the fire refused to die. No spell could quench it. No charm could cool it. And now, at its center, beneath the ribcage of a long-collapsed cottage, they found it. A core, not a stone, not a flame, but a shape. Two hearts entwined, pulsing with a soft amber light. They hovered just above the ground, suspended in air, their surfaces rippling like liquid glass. Ginny dropped to her knees, breath-catching. "That's impossible," Harry whispered. "It's not," she said, reaching out. The moment her fingers neared the surface, memories surged through her. Laughter in the Gryffindor common room, a broomstick between her legs, the wind screaming in her ears. Then pain, the snap of bone, the silence after the crowd's roar. The slow, suffocating grief of losing herself. And then him, Harry. Not as the Auror beside her now, but as the boy who had kissed her under a willow tree, whose hands had once trembled as they touched her face. She gasped, pulling back. "It's made of memory," she said, voice trembling. "Not just any memory. Things we've buried, things we've loved and lost." Harry knelt beside her, his face washed in golden light. Then why here? Why now? Ginny looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the quiet weight he carried like a second cloak. She had spent years pushing him away, telling herself it was for his safety, for her independence. But the truth flickered in that glowing core. She had been afraid. Afraid of needing someone, afraid of burning out. "This fire," she said slowly. "It's not a curse, it's a call. A call to who? To us." The core pulsed brighter now. The flames around them stilled, leaning in. A whisper rose, not in words, but in feeling, warmth, longing, the ache of something unfinished. Harry reached out, his hand covering hers. "I never stopped," he said. "So quiet it was almost lost. Even when you walked away, I never stopped loving you." Tears pricked her eyes. The core flared, light rippling outward in waves. The flames responded, not with fury but with harmony, rising, swirling, forming a dome above them that shimmered like a second sky. Ginny turned her hand beneath his, lacing their fingers together. "Then maybe," she said, voice steady now, "we don't fight the fire. Maybe we let it burn." And as the light swallowed them, not in pain, but in understanding. The village exhaled. The flames softened. The heat receded, and for the first time in years, Ginny felt whole, not healed, not fixed, but alive. Alive in the way fire is alive. Wild, true, unafraid. The air shimmered like molten glass, thick with heat, that pulsed in time with Ginny's racing heart. Around him, the village square writhed with flame, not wild, not chaotic, but watching. Tongues of fire curled upward like sentient serpents, their cores glowing with shifting hues, deep amber, bruised violet, a fleeting crimson that reminded Harry of Ginny's hair in sunlight. The elemental had formed itself from the heart of the burning well, a towering figure of living flame, its voice, not a sound but a resonance in the bones. "You flee what burns within," it said, though its mouth, if it had one, did not move. The words seared the back of Harry's skull. "You call it control, you name it duty, but it is fear, and fear feeds me." Ginny stepped forward, her palms raised, not in defense, but surrender. Sweat glistened at her temples, her red hair clinging to her neck. She had spent months studying fire, its origins, its will, its language. But this was not theory. This was memory made manifest. "It's not just the village," she whispered. "It's us." Harry turned to her, his green eyes shadowed. "We can't deal with this now, Ginny. We need to contain it." "Contain?" She laughed, short and sharp. "You spent years containing everything. Your grief, your guilt, your feelings, and look where it got you. Chasing shadows while the real fire burns right here." The elemental shifted, its form rippling. Flames spiraled toward the ground, weaving a circle around them. The heat pressed close, but it no longer felt hostile. It felt like waiting. "You loved," the fire pulsed. "You let go, you did not mourn." Harry flinched. His hand twitched toward his wand, but Ginny caught his wrist. "Don't," she said. "It's not fighting us. It's showing us." He looked down at her, really looked, and something cracked behind his eyes. "I thought I was protecting you. After the war, after everything. I thought if I stayed away, you'd be safe." "Free?" Free, Ginny's voice trembled. "Oh, forgotten. I didn't need protection, Harry. I needed you, and you took that choice from me." The fire flared, not in anger, but in recognition. Images flickered in the flames, Ginny laughing on the Quidditch pitch, Harry watching from the stands, his heart full and silent. The kiss in the common room, the warmth of her hands on his face. Then silence, distance, years of letters unanswered, glances avoided at family dinners. "I was afraid," Harry said, the words, raw. "Afraid that if I let myself want you, really want you, I'd lose you. And I couldn't survive that." Ginny stepped closer, the heat between them no longer, just from the elemental. "You didn't lose me, you walked away." The fire dimmed, drawing inward. The towering figure lowered, its flames softening into a low, pulsing glow that lit the cobblestones like embers at dusk. "You name it now," it whispered. "You do not hide." Tears traced paths through the soot on Ginny's cheeks. She reached up, her fingers brushing Harry's jaw, tentative, then sure. "I never stopped loving you, not really." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. "I never stopped either." For a long moment they stood there, surrounded by dying flame, the weight of years suspended in the heat. Then Harry opened his eyes, and in them, Ginny saw, not the boy who lived, not the Auror, not the burdened hero, but the boy who had once held her hand beneath the willow tree, by the lake. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm sorry," he murmured. She smiled, faint, but real. "Don't be. Just don't go." The last of the fire curled around their feet like a contented cat, then faded into the earth with a sigh. The air cooled. The village was silent but unharmed. Above the first stars pierced the twilight, and for the first time in years they breathed. The air tasted of ash and old magic, thick enough to coat the back of Ginny's throat. Around her, the village smoldered in silence, not with destruction, but with a strange, suspended burn, flames frozen mid-leap on charred timbers, glowing embers suspended like stars in the twilight. They weren't ordinary fires. They breathed, they watched, and they remembered. She stood at the center of the scorched square, barefoot, on warm stone, her arms outstretched, not in defiance, but in offering. Harry had tried to stop her, his voice tight with fear. "Ginny, you don't know what it'll do." But she had walked past him, steady, her heart a slow drum beneath her ribs. She'd spent years studying fire, not just its physics, its spells, but its soul. And now, in the wake of ancient pain and forgotten grief, she understood. This fire wasn't attacking. It was screaming. It had been born from a tragedy centuries old, a village sacrificed in a purge of elemental magic, its people bound to the land by a curse they never named. Their rage, their sorrow, their love, all transmuted by fire, trapped in an eternal cycle of combustion and rebirth. No spell could quench it, no charm could bind it, only recognition could free it. Ginny closed her eyes. She thought of the pitch, the wind tearing through her hair as she dove for the snitch, the roar of the crowd like a living thing. Then, pain, the sickening crack of bone, the silence that followed, the slow unraveling of an identity built on speed and strength. She had raged then, too. She had burned, quietly, fiercely alone. She thought of Harry, standing in the rain outside her flat 6 months ago, his eyes hollow with missions he couldn't speak of, grief he wouldn't name. She had turned him away, not out of anger, but fear. Fear that if she let him in, she'd have to face the parts of herself she'd buried beneath research and solitude. The flame in front of her pulsed, a low hum vibrating through the ground. "I see you," she whispered. The fire shuddered. Tendrils of light curled toward her, hesitant. "You're not a monster," she said, voice stronger now. "You're a memory, a story that never got told." A gust swirled, not of wind, but of heat, carrying whispers in a language older than words. Images flickered in the fire. Children laughing by a hearth, elders chanting under a blood-red moon, a woman with silver hair raising her hands as the first torches approached. Betrayal, sacrifice, love, unbroken even in death. Tears slipped down Ginny's cheeks, evaporating before they reached her jaw. "I'm not here to fight you," she said. "I'm here to remember you." She stepped forward, placing her palm into the heart of the largest flame. It didn't burn, it welcomed. The surge of warmth, gentle, immense, flooded through her, not scorching, but filling. She felt every sorrow the fire had carried, every moment of isolation, every cry lost to time, and she didn't push it away. She held it. She sang, softly, wordlessly, like her mother used to, when the world felt too dark. Around her, the frozen flames began to move. They softened, their violent edges blurring into ribbons of gold and crimson, swirling like dancers in a long-forgotten rite. The heat lessened, not dying, but transforming, becoming light, not destruction. Harry watched from the edge of the square, his wand lowered, his breath caught in his chest. He saw her, not just the fiery girl he'd loved, not just the brilliant mind she'd become, but something deeper. A bridge, a vessel, a woman who had learned to burn without consuming. One by one, the flames rose, not in anger, but in release, and spiraled upward, forming a column of shimmering light that pierced the night sky. For a moment, the entire village glowed with a gentle radiance, as if kissed by dawn. Then silence. The flames were gone. Only embers remained, cool to the touch. Ginny swayed, her breath ragged, but her face serene. Harry ran to her, catching her before her knees gave way. "You did it," he murmured, his voice raw. She looked up at him, eyes glassy with exhaustion, at something else, something like peace. "No," she said softly. "I just finally listened." And in the quiet that followed, as the first real stars emerged above them, Harry held her close, and the earth, at long last, stopped burning. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke, the kind that lingers after rain and quiet. Ginny stood barefoot on the stone step of the old hearth house, her toes curling into the cool moss between the cracks. The fire had gone, not vanished, not defeated, but settled, like a creature finally remembering its name. It pulsed now in the center of the village square, a low golden ring no taller than a child's knee, humming faintly beneath the stars. The villagers had emerged slowly, wrapped in cloaks in disbelief, peering at the flames as if they might still bite. But the fire did not leap, it only breathed. Harry stood beside her, his Auror robe scorched at the hem, his face streaked with ash. He hadn't spoken in nearly an hour. His fingers twitched at his side, still coiled with the memory of casting, of trying to bind what could not be bound. But in the end it hadn't been magic that calmed the fire. It had been Ginny's voice, soft, steady, repeating the old incantation, not as a command, but as a question. "Do you remember?" And the flames had shimmered, like light on water, and answered. "They're not gone," Ginny said, her voice low. "Just resting." Harry exhaled, long and slow. "I thought we'd have to destroy them. We almost did. That's what they feared." She turned to look at him, her red hair loose and tangled, a few strands clinging to her damp cheek. They weren't attacking. They were calling. He studied her in the dim glow, the way her eyes caught the firelight like embers. "You understood them. I didn't at first, but when you stopped trying to fight and late listening." You glanced back at the circle. They weren't angry. They were lonely. Forgotten. The runes on the hearth. They weren't a prison. They were a promise. And when no one came to renew it, the fire grew wild, trying to remind the world it still existed. A child, no older than 6, stepped forward, bare legs pale in the moonlight. She crouched near the edge of the ring, not touching, but smiling. The flame nearest her curled gently toward her, not hot, not dangerous, but curious. Her mother gasped, then bit her lip when the girl giggled. "It's warm," the child said. Like a hug, Ginny felt something loosen in her chest. For the first time since her fall from the Quidditch pitch, since the healers had told her she'd never fly again, she didn't feel broken. She felt necessary. Harry shifted beside her. "What now?" "We teach them, the villagers, how to speak to the fire, how to tend it, not fear it." She looked at him. "And we find the others, the hearths. There are 7, aren't there, scattered across the old territories. If this one woke, the others might too." He nodded slowly. "That's an Auror matter. It's a researcher's matter, too." She smiled, faint but real. "Guess we're both needed." He met her gaze, and something passed between them, quiet, unspoken, like the shift of wind before a storm. Not anger, not regret. Something warmer, something that had been smoldering for years. "I've missed you," he said simply. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, calloused, familiar, and laced her fingers through his. The fire pulsed, once, like a heartbeat. "Me too," she whispered. And in that moment, under a sky washed clean by rain, with the scent of ancient magic still curling through the air, they stood not as hero and healer, survivor and seeker, but as two people who had finally stopped running, from loss, from longing, from the fires they thought would burn them alive. The flames flickered, low and kind, and the village slept, no longer afraid. The first light of dawn crept over the scorched rooftops of Harlow's Hollow, painting the charred beams in hues of rose and gold, as if the sky were trying to apologize. Harry stood in the center of what had once been a cobbled square, now littered with splintered wood, and the faint, lingering scent of burnt sugar, odd considering no bakery had stood there. His hands were blistered, his back a knot of tension, but he kept driving nails into fresh planks with a quiet determination. Around him, villagers moved like ghosts, their faces pale beneath soot-streaked cheeks, passing buckets of water, dragging away debris, whispering prayers to gods who hadn't answered last time. He hadn't slept. Not really. The dreams had come again, flames that spoke in voices he almost recognized, walls that wept ash. But here, in daylight, with the weight of a hammer in his palm, he could pretend control was possible. Every nail driven was a defiance, every plank aligned, a promise. A soft cough broke the rhythm. He turned, blinking against the low sun. Ginny stood at the edge of the square, wrapped in a deep green cloak, her red hair tied back in a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. She held a thick, leather-bound journal in one arm and a thermos in the other. Her eyes, warm, sharp, met his without hesitation. "You look like you wrestled a Hungarian horntail and lost," she said, stepping closer. He managed a tired smile. Close, a pile of enchanted timber that refused to stay level. She handed him the thermos. "Pepper up tea, strong. I added a pinch of willow bark, good for sore muscles." He unscrewed the cap, and a plume of steam curled into the air, carrying the sharp tang of magic and herbs. "You remembered." "I remember a lot of things," she said quietly. her gaze drifting to the half-rebuilt cottage behind him. "This one yours, for now. The Fletchers will move back in once the wards are stable." She nodded, opening her journal. The pages were filled with tight, elegant script, interspersed with diagrams of flame patterns and marginal notes in red ink. "I've been tracking the burn path since last night. The fire didn't just spread, it chose. It bypassed the well, the apothecary, even the owl post, but it took the schoolhouse, the town hall, and 3 homes on the East Row, all places where people argued, where voices were raised." Harry frowned, lowering the thermos. "You think it's reacting to emotion?" "I think it's alive," she said. "Not like a creature, but like a memory, given heat. I've read about elemental sentience in old texts. Fire that remembers betrayal, that lingers where grief pools. This isn't random destruction, it's retaliation." He stared at the scorched foundation near his feet. "Then we're not rebuilding houses, we're rebuilding trust." Ginny exhaled, her breath, a pale cloud in the cool air. "Exactly. The ministry wants data, so I'm compiling everything. Temperature anomalies, residue composition, witness accounts. But they're missing the point. This isn't just magic gone wrong, it's magic wounded." He looked at her then, really looked. Not the girl he'd once loved from afar, not the star chaser whose name echoed in stadiums, but someone quieter, fiercer. A woman who had lost one fire and walked straight into another. "You're not just studying it," he said. "You're trying to understand it." Her fingers tightened on the journal. "I spent years controlling fire on a broom, Harry. But now I wonder, what if control was never the answer? What if we're supposed to listen instead?" A silence settled between them, soft as ash. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and a dog barked. Life, stubborn and hopeful, pressing forward. Harry reached out, brushing a streak of soot from her cheek. "Then maybe we've both been asking the wrong questions." She didn't pull away, maybe. "But we're asking them together now." The ink bled slightly at the corner of the parchment, blurred by a drop of rain that had slipped through the cracked window pane. Ginny dipped her quill again, watching the dark tip hover above the page. Outside, the wind stirred the ash-covered fields beyond the village, lifting fine gray spirals like memories unwilling to settle. She exhaled, long and slow, and began. "Dear Alicia, I don't know if this will reach you, or if you'll toss it unopened into the fire. That's fair. I wouldn't blame you. I left without a word. Not to Angelina, not to Katie, not to any of you. I just vanished. You deserved better. You deserved an explanation, a face-to-face, something. Instead, you got silence, and the whispers. Ginny Weasley, fallen star, couldn't handle the pressure. Lost her nerve." She paused, pressing the heel of her hand to her temple. The old ache flared there. Not physical, not anymore, but the ghost of it, the echo of impact when her broom shattered mid-dive, the way her body twisted in the air before the ground rushed up. She hadn't been afraid of falling, she'd been afraid of what came after. But the truth is, I was afraid. Not of Quidditch, not even of pain. I was afraid of becoming only that, the chaser, the hero, the Weasley girl who could fly like fire. When I couldn't fly anymore, I didn't know who I was, so I ran. From the team, from the pitch, from everyone who looked at me like I was broken. She traced the edge of the parchment with her thumb, feeling the rough texture. The fire in the hearth flickered, casting long shadows that danced like figures from another time. She'd lit it with a touch, no wand, just focus and breathe. A trick she'd learned in the last 6 months, studying the old texts in the village archives. The flames responded to her now, not as enemies, but as something listening. "I'm writing now not to ask for forgiveness, though I hope someday you might find it in you. I'm writing to say I'm sorry for leaving you to carry the load, for making you think I didn't care. I cared. I still do. I watch the matches sometimes when a wireless signal finds its way through the mountains. I hear your name, Angelina's, Katie's, and I smile. You're still brilliant. You're still flying like storms." She dipped the quill again, the motion steadying her. "I've been in a place where fire isn't sport or spell, but something alive. Not evil, not good, just ancient, and angry, and misunderstood. It speaks in heat and light, in absence and return. I've learned that some things can't be controlled, not truly. You can't command a wildfire to stop. But you can learn its rhythm. You can stand beside it without burning. Maybe that's when I needed to learn about myself. She folded the letter carefully, sealing it with a drop of red wax that hardened into the shape of a phoenix. One by one she wrote to them all. Angelina, Katie, even Roger Davies from Holyhead, who'd once kissed her behind the stands after a win. Each letter shorter than the last, but no less true. When she stepped outside at dusk, the sky bled orange and violet. She held out her hand, and a small flame rose from her palm, curling like a cat stretching in the sun. With a breath, she sent it upward. A messenger of light, spiraling into the darkening air. It would find them, or it wouldn't. Either way, she was no longer hiding. The rain tapped a steady rhythm against the window pane, soft and insistent, like a memory refusing to be ignored. Harry sat on the edge of the worn wooden chair, steam curling from the chipped ceramic mug in his hands. He didn't drink. He just watched the droplets race down the glass, distorting the view of the village below. Crooked chimneys smoking into the gray afternoon, goats huddled beneath a tarp, children chasing a drenched barn cat through the mud. It was quiet here. Too quiet sometimes, but it was safe. For now. Ginny stood at the hearth, her back to him, stirring something in a blackened pot. The fire beneath it danced, too high, too bright, and for a moment, Harry stiffened. But it didn't leap, it didn't speak, it simply burned, ordinary and necessary. She hadn't flinched either. That was new. "You're quiet today," she said, not turning. "Just thinking. About the report. Partly." She glanced over her shoulder. Then, her hair a deep auburn curtain in the firelight. "You don't have to protect me from it, Harry. I read the notes. I know what the flames said in Seabridge." She swallowed. "He called me a liar, and you believed them." "No, not really." He exhaled, long and slow. "But they knew things. Things I haven't told anyone." Her spoon stilled. "Like what?" "Like how I dream about the forest fire at Godric's Hollow. Not the house, the trees. The way the flames moved. Like they were watching me. Like they knew me." She turned fully now, wiping her hands on the linen towel. "That's not just a dream. That's residue. Old magic doesn't forget. Especially fire. It remembers every hand that fed it. Every fear that stoked it." He looked down at his palms, calloused from wands and weapons. "I used to think fire was just destruction. Now I'm not so sure." "No," she said softly. "It's transformation. Painful. Yes, uncontrollable, often, but not mindless." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "The night my leg shattered, do you remember what I said?" He nodded. "You said, 'It's singing.'" Her eyes held his. "I thought I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. The fire that burned the pitch that day, it wasn't an accident. It chose that moment. It felt my surrender, my giving up, and it answered." A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken years. The Quidditch crowds, the war, the letters that stopped coming, the kisses under mistletoe that never led to more. He had chased shadows across continents, while she turned inward, studying embers like sacred texts. "You've changed," he said. "So have you. Less reckless." She almost smiled. "Less alone, maybe." Outside, the rain slowed. A sliver of pale sun broke through the clouds, glinting off wet stone. The fire in the hearth dimmed, not dying, but falling in on itself, as if listening. Harry set the mug down. "I handed in my badge today." Ginny froze. "You resigned?" "Just a leave. Indefinite." He looked up. "There's more here, with you, with this research. I can feel it. It's not just about controlling the flames. It's about listening." She crossed the room in 3 steps, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the faint scar along her jaw from a robe bludger. "You stayed," she whispered. "I'm trying." She reached for his hand, calloused, scarred, familiar, and laced her fingers through his. "Then stay for dinner, and tomorrow, and the day after." He didn't answer. He just squeezed her hand, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like the space between heartbeats, brief, but full of promise. The fire crackled again, low and warm, like a secret shared between old friends. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the window pane of the small stone cottage, nestled at the edge of the high moor. Inside, firelight flickered across pages of parchment covered in careful script and diagrams of flame patterns. Ginny Weasley sat cross-legged on the worn rug, her red hair pulled into a loose braid that fell over one shoulder. A quill hovered above a fresh sheet, guided by her wand as she murmured notes into the silence. "And the flame's movement correlates not with ambient temperature," she said softly, more to herself than anyone, but with shifts in emotional resonance. "Fear produces a jagged, erratic burn, like lightning in reverse, whereas calm produces a spiral, almost like a heartbeat made visible." The quill dutifully inked her words, looping neatly beneath her voice. She exhaled, watching the embers in the hearth pulse in response, as though the fire itself were listening. A floorboard creaked behind her. She didn't turn. "You've been at this for hours," Harry said, stepping into the room with a steaming mug in each hand. He placed one beside her without asking, then lowered himself onto the rug with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. "Still no sleep?" "Not yet," she replied, finally looking at him. The firelight caught the green in her eyes, warm and shifting. "I keep thinking about the villagers, the way the flames avoided the child near the well, not because she was small, but because she wasn't afraid, she was laughing." Harry sipped his tea. "So it's not just emotion, it's intent too." "Exactly." She tapped the parchment. "We've been treating elemental fire like a force to be controlled, like a spell gone wild. But what if it's not a spell at all? What if it's a response?" He studied the sketches she'd made, flame sigils that mirrored ancient runes from the northern druidic traditions. "You think it's sentient?" "I think it's aware," she corrected. "Not in the way we are. More like an echo. It feels what people feel, and it answers back. The more suppressed the emotion, the more violent the reaction. That's why the fire started in the cellar beneath the magistrate's house. He's been burying everything, grief, guilt, for years." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "Sounds familiar." Ginny turned to him. "What do you mean?" He looked down at his hands. "When I came back from that mission, after the fire in Hogsmeade, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes I saw flames. Not from the attack, from before, from when Sirius." He stopped, cleared his throat. "I didn't talk about it, not really, and the dreams only got worse." She reached for his hand, her fingers warm against his. "And now?" He glanced at the hearth. The fire had calmed, its light soft and golden. "Now I'm here, talking, and the fire's not screaming anymore." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the key. Not suppression, not domination. Just presence." He looked at her, really looked. Seeing the shadows under her eyes, the quiet strength in her posture, the way she still held his hand, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We should write this down," he said. "Not just for the ministry, for anyone who's ever been afraid of their own shadow." Ginny picked up her quill again. "Co-authors?" He leaned closer, shoulder brushing hers. "Always." And as the rain whispered against the glass, and the fire breathed in time with their words, they began, not with incantations or containment spells, but with a single line at the top of a fresh parchment. "Emotional resonance as a catalyst, in sentient flame phenomena. Observations from the Elderglen incident." The air in the cottage was thick, with the scent of dried herbs and wood smoke, the kind that clung to old stone and lingered in woolen blankets. Rain tapped a quiet rhythm against the window panes, soft as a heartbeat, while the single lantern on the table cast flickering shadows across Ginny's open journal. Her quill hovered above a page filled with sketches of flame patterns, spiral tongues of fire that danced in precise, unnatural formations. She had spent weeks tracing their paths, comparing them to fragments from forgotten grimoires, trying to understand why the fires in this village refused to die, why they seemed to watch. A knock at the door startled her. She looked up, pulse skipping, though she told herself it was only the wind. But then it came again, firm, deliberate. She rose, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and pulled the door open. Harry stood in the rain, his Auror cloak soaked through, water dripping from the ends of his hair. His glasses were fogged, but his eyes, sharp, green, familiar, found hers at once. "Ginny," he said, breathless. "I didn't know where else to go." She stepped aside without a word, and he entered, leaving wet footprints on the floorboards. He smelled of damp earth and cold fire, of places where magic had burned too long and too deep. "You're chasing the same thing I am," she said. Not a question. He nodded, peeling off his cloak. "The fires aren't accidental. They're responding to something, to someone." She handed him a towel, and their fingers brushed. It was barely a touch, skin to skin, warm and brief, but it sent a jolt through her, like the first spark of a controlled flame. She pulled her hand back as if burned, but didn't look away. Harry stared at her, really stared, the way he hadn't in years. Not on the pitch, not at family dinners, not in the aftermath of war, when they had both been too broken to speak. Now, in this quiet room, with rain falling like a veil between them and the world, something shifted. "I thought I'd find answers out there," he said quietly, nodding toward the window. "Instead, I keep remembering things I shouldn't." "Like what?" "Like the way you laughed after we won the cup in 3. Like how you looked at me the night before I left for the ministry training. Like how I never told you why I walked away." Ginny's breath caught. She turned to the hearth, stirring the embers with a poker, buying time. "We were young, Harry, we were scared. We were in love," he said, so softly she almost missed it. She froze. He took a step closer. "I never stopped. Not really. I told myself I did. For your safety. For peace. For all the noble reasons I've repeated like a spell. But it was never true." The fire crackled, and for a moment, the flames rose unnaturally high, twisting into a spiral that mirrored the one in her journal. They both turned, startled, but neither moved. "It's listening," Ginny whispered. "So are we," he said. She turned to face him, her heart a wild thing in her chest. "I spent years trying to control fire, to dissect it, to make it obey. But this, us, it's not something I can contain. It never was." "No," he agreed, closing the distance between them. "It's something that just is." Their hands found each other. Not by accident this time. His fingers laced through hers, calloused and sure. The warmth spread up her arms, not like fire, but like coming home. Outside, the rain slowed. The flames in the hearth settled into a slow, steady glow, and in that quiet between breath and confession, between past and future, Ginny whispered what she'd carried for 10 years. "I never let go either." Harry smiled, small, real, the kind that reached his eyes and pulled her close, not to fix anything, not to fight, just to stand there, together, in the light. The air above the lake shimmered with quiet light, each lantern a trembling breath of gold, drifting upward from cupped hands. Ginny stood at the water's edge, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, the cold seeping through woolen socks she'd charmed twice for warmth. Around her the villagers moved in hushed procession, their faces softened by the glow, their voices low as prayers. No one spoke of the fire that had scorched the eastern grove only 3 nights prior. No one needed to. The memory lived in the soot-stained bark of the willows and the wary flicker in their eyes when the wind stirred. She held her own lantern loosely, its rice-paper sides delicate as moth wings, the wick inside flickering with a charm she'd learned from an old arithmancy text. Not fire, not quite. A captured ember, bound by syllables and intent. It pulsed gently in her palm, warm but not burning. She'd spent years chasing the essence of flame, its birth, its hunger, its voice. And now, here, among people who spoke to fire like a child speaks to a storm, she felt closer to understanding than she ever had in a library. A figure appeared beside her, tall and quiet, his silhouette edged in lantern light. Harry, he didn't speak at first, just held out his hands to light his own offering, a clumsy thing, lopsided, the kind a child might make. She smiled despite herself. "You're terrible at this," she said, adjusting the paper fold with a careful finger. "I've had more practice disarming wands than folding vapor," he replied, voice low. She caught the familiar rasp in his tone, the one that came after long silences, after too many things left unsaid. They hadn't spoken properly in years, not since she'd walked away from the Harpy's pitch, with a shattered ankle, and a heart too proud to admit it was breaking. And now here he was, Auror, robes dusted with ash, eyes shadowed from sleepless nights, chasing embers that moved like thoughts. The lanterns began to rise in earnest, a slow constellation lifting from the shore. They hovered for a moment above the black water, reflections trembling like dying stars, then drifted upward, carried by a wind that smelled of pine and old magic. "They believe the fire remembers," Harry said, watching the lights ascend. "That it carries the names of the lost." Ginny nodded. "Not all fire destroys. Some of it remembers how to return." He turned to her then, really looked at her, and she felt it, the weight of years, of unspoken words, of a kiss in a broom cupboard, that had meant more than either had admitted. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. "Before I even got here. You knew this wasn't just an accident." She exhaled, her breath a white curl in the cold. "I've been reading about the hollow flames, elementals bound by grief. They don't burn without reason. They answer to sorrow, to silence, and the grove was where the old priestess died. They buried her alive, they say, because they feared her connection to the flame. She didn't fight, just sang as the earth covered her. The fire came at night. It's been returning ever since." Harry was silent for a long time. Then, "You should have written." She laughed, soft and sad. "And said what? Dear Harry, I think your latest case is a centuries-old magical weeping fit." He almost smiled. "Almost. I missed you." The words hung between them, fragile as the lanterns now fading into the sky. She didn't turn to him, afraid that if she did, she'd break. Afraid that if she didn't, she already had. Above, the last lantern trembled, then winked out. And in the dark, the lake breathed. Rain tapped a rhythm against the window pane, soft and steady, like a secret being whispered between old friends. The cottage smelled of dried lavender and wood smoke, the hearth glowing low with embers that pulsed like a heartbeat. Ginny stood by the kitchen counter, pouring tea into 2 chipped mugs, one with a faded golden snitch on the side, the other painted with tiny flames that flickered when touched. She smiled faintly. "Some habits never left. You don't have to keep doing this," Harry said from the doorway, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, still in his Auror robes, though the insignia was dulled from weeks in the field. "I can sleep in the village. There's an inn, and let you freeze in that drafty little room while the wind howls down from the moors." She turned, handing him the mug with the snitch. "You'd be buried in blankets by midnight." He took it with a small smile, fingers brushing hers for just a second. "Still don't know how you managed to keep this place so warm." "Fire likes me," she said simply, walking to the hearth. She knelt, not with effort, but with something like reverence, and reached toward the coals. The embers stirred, curling upward like waking animals. A tendril of flame lifted, dancing just above her palm, warm but not burning. "It listens." Harry watched, silent. He'd seen her do it before, the way fire bent to her, will not through force, but through something deeper. Understanding. It wasn't control, it was conversation. "I used to think fire was just destruction," he said. "After the Department of Mysteries, after so many fires and raids, I only saw what it took." Ginny tilted her head, the firelight catching the red in her hair, turning it molten. "And now?" He stepped closer, setting his mug on a stone ledge. "Now I think, maybe it gives too. Light, warmth, a place to come back to." She looked up at him then, really looked. The years had carved lines beside his eyes, subtle but there, the kind that came from squinting into sunrises after long nights, from frowns held too long in thought. But his eyes were softer now, less guarded. "You've changed," she said. "So have you," he answered. "You used to charge at everything like a chaser with a bludger at her back. Now you pause." She laughed softly. "Guess fire teaches patience. You can't rush it. You can't shout it into obedience. You have to wait. Listen." He sat beside her on the rug, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The silence wasn't heavy. It was full, of the crackle of the hearth, the hush of the rain, the unspoken things settling like ash into soil. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, so low she almost missed it. She turned. "You didn't. I let you go. After the war. After everything. I thought I was protecting you. From me. From the chaos. You didn't lose me, Harry. I was always here. Just not where you were looking," he exhaled, long and slow. "I keep wondering what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd chosen differently." Ginny reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. Her skin was warm, as if she carried a bit of the fire inside her. "We can't go back, but we're here now. That counts for something." Outside, the wind shifted, rattling the ivy against the glass. But inside, the fire held steady. The flames curled gently, almost content, as if they, too, sensed the quiet shift in the air, the slow rekindling of something long banked but never gone. And for the first time in years, the silence between them didn't feel like absence. It felt like beginning. The fire crackled low in the hearth, a quiet pulse of gold and amber that seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the cottage. It didn't roar. There was no need. This flame was small, no larger than a hare's nest, and it nestled in a circle of smooth river stones. Ginny had collected from the edge of the black lake. It flickered gently, more like candlelight than wildfire, and when Harry stirred the tea on the stove, it leaned toward him, just slightly, as if curious. Ginny sat cross-legged on the rug, her back against the worn velvet arm of the sofa, a book open in her lap. Not one of her research tomes, not tonight. A novel, something old, something muggle, with a cracked leather cover and pages that smelled faintly of rain. She sipped her tea, honey-sweet, and glanced up at Harry as he set a steaming mug beside her. "Careful," he murmured. "It's hot." She smiled. "So are you." He rolled his eyes, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "Still sharp. Always." He lowered himself beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. The fire hummed, just a whisper of sound, soft and warm, like a cat purring beneath a spell. Ginny turned her palm upward, and the flame stretched a tendril toward her fingers, not burning, just brushing her skin like a breath. "They like you," Harry said. "They like us," she corrected. "And they know when we're lying. Since when are they so wise? Since they can feel your heartbeat when you look at me." He exhaled. A quiet laugh caught in his chest. The fire swayed, responding, its light deepening into a richer gold. It didn't flare. It never flared. Not here. Not anymore. This flame had come from the edge of the northern moors, where the earth still whispered with old magic, where fire didn't destroy, but remembered. They'd found it together, buried under ash and moss, a spark refusing to die. Now it lived in her cottage, a guest, a companion. Harry reached out, not touching, just letting the warmth kiss his fingers. "Do you think they're lonely out there? The others?" "Lonely?" Ginny considered. "We're just waiting. Waiting for what? For someone who won't try to put them out." He looked at her then, really looked. The firelight caught the green in her eyes, the faint lines at their corners. Not from age, not yet, but from squinting into sunlit pitches, from late nights spent reading by candlelight, from years of choosing quiet over chaos. He'd missed this, her stillness, the way she could hold silence like something precious. "I used to think fire was only danger," he said. "In the department, that's all we see, blazes set by dark curses, in fairy with flames in their hands, cursed hearths that burn children alive. We learn to fear it, to stamp it out. And now," he watched the flame curl, gently around itself, like a sleeping serpent. "Now, I think we've been wrong. Maybe fire isn't the enemy. Maybe it's just misunderstood." Ginny closed her book and set it aside. "Like people. Like us." The fire hummed again, louder this time, a soft, melodic tone that resonated in the hollow of her ribs. It pulsed once, twice, then settled, its rhythm slow and sure. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, but inside the air was warm, still. Harry leaned his head back against the sofa. "Do you ever miss it? The pitch? The crowds?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I miss the flight, the feeling of being untethered. But not the noise, not the expectation." She turned to him. "I think I needed to fall to find this, to learn how to be still." He reached for her hand. We both did. And in the hush that followed, the fire glowed, not brighter but deeper, as if it carried their words into its core, and held them there, safe, warm, alive. The wind carried the scent of rain and old stone through the valley, curling around the low stone walls of the rebuilt village like a remembered lullaby. Children laughed in the square, chasing sparks that danced just above their fingers. Harmless now, playful, like fireflies spun from legend. Above them, carved into the living rock of the mountainside, glowed a single rune in soft amber light, the sigil of the Heartfire. It pulsed faintly, in time with the heartbeat of the earth, or so the elders said. Ginny stood at the edge of the meadow, her arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth. She no longer wore Quidditch robes or carried a wand at her hip like a weapon. Now her robes were deep crimson, lined with ash-gray thread, and her hands, once quick to grip a broom, now traced the patterns of flame in the air, as if reading Braille. She had spent 12 years studying fire that remembered, fire that felt, fire that loved. They called her the Keeper of the Ember. Behind her, footsteps crunched on gravel, familiar, steady. She didn't turn. "You're late," she said, voice low. "I stopped at the ridge," Harry answered. The flame remembered me. She smiled, just slightly. It always does. He came to stand beside her, his Auror coat dusted with mountain frost, his glasses smudged at the edge. He looked older. Everyone did. But his eyes still held that quiet fire, the one that had never needed magic to burn. He gazed out over the village, where the hearths glowed with a warmth that never dimmed, even in winter. "They tell the story to the children now," he said, "about the girl who danced with fire, and the man who followed her into the blaze. And the fire that refused to die," Ginny added. He turned to her. "Because it wasn't meant to. No, it hadn't been. Not the fire in the mountains. Not the fire between them. They had been young then, reckless, scarred, running from ghosts." Ginny had buried herself in scrolls and flame, chasing a purpose beyond the roar of a crowd. Harry had chased shadows across the world, hunting darkness he could never outrun, and fate, cruel and kind, had brought them both to a dying village where the flames climbed the walls and whispered names in the dark. She had known, the moment they met again, that something had changed, not just in the world, but in them. They had stood back to back in the heart of the inferno, Ginny chanting in a forgotten tongue, Harry shielding her with spells that cracked like thunder. The fire had not attacked. It had recognized. It had been waiting. The heart fire, they learned, was not a curse. It was a memory, a promise made by a witch and a warrior centuries ago, when love had been offered not as possession but as balance, when fire had not been feared but honored, and when it had been betrayed, it had slept, until two souls arrived who understood what it meant to burn without destroying. Ginny had stepped forward, hand outstretched, and the fire had curled around her fingers like a cat. Harry had not flinched. He had taken her other hand and stood with her in the flame. They rebuilt the village. They taught the people to listen. And when the fire returned each spring, dancing in the fields like a greeting, the children would run to meet it. Now, as twilight fell, a single spark lifted from the central hearth and spiraled upward, joining the rune in the stone. It flared once, bright, golden, then soughed. "Do you ever miss it?" Harry asked, quiet. "The pitch? The crowds?" Ginny looked at him. "I miss the freedom, the speed, but I found another kind of flight." He nodded. "So did I." She reached for his hand. His fingers, calloused and warm, laced through hers. Below, a child pointed at the sky. "Look, the fire is telling a story," and high above, the ember light shifted, forming shapes, two figures, hand in hand, walking into flame, not to escape, but to begin.